Thanks, Jane. Apparently I'm Councillor Hugh Mason this morning.
Excellent.
But according to this, I prefer to believe this one. It tells me I'm Councillor Lee Hunt. I don't mind. Anyway, welcome everybody. I am indeed Councillor Lee Hunt, and I'm the chairman of the chair of the planning committee, and please be assured that we have put appropriate cleansing and social distancing measures in place to ensure that this meeting is undertaken in a COVID-secure manner. This has included a request for all attendees to have an LFD test within 48 hours of the meeting, the use of NHS track and trace app or attendee log, 2 metre social distancing, the wearing of masks when not seated, and a temperature check upon arrival. Limited public seating has been made available, however this meeting is also being webcast to allow the public to attend remotely if they wish. Please be advised that the public seating area is not in the view of the camera used to webcast this meeting. Can I ask members to remain seated throughout the duration of the meeting and to wear a face covering unless seated. Please only use seats marked with a green circle. These seats have been allocated to ensure 2 metre social distancing. If the continuous fire alarm sounds, evacuate the room and public gallery by the stairwells. Do not attempt to use the lifts. Please assemble at Queen Victoria's statue in front of the civic offices. In order to comply with the Guildhall Trust Fire Marshal regulations, anyone who signed the Guildhall reception desk should sign out when leaving the building at the end of today's meeting. May I draw everybody's attention to the fact that this meeting will be live streamed. A bit like being in one of those aircraft, you know. Anyway, and everyone speaking via a microphone will be on camera, including those making deputations, although we have had one request this morning that shouldn't be so. So the camera will be focused on myself. And I've had a nice little trim to make sure I'm ready for that. Anyway, members of the press and public are also permitted to record the meeting on the understanding that it neither disrupts the meeting nor records those stating explicitly that they do not wish to be recorded. Please can everyone use the microphones and remember to switch them off when they have finished. So what I'm going to do now is I go around the room and get people to introduce themselves. But I'm not going to go to the deputies this time, just in case the camera switches over by mistake. So we'll go left to right this time. We'll start with Eze.
Thank you, Chair. Eze Keledo, Head of Development Management. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chairman. Ian Maguire, Assistant Director for Planning and Economic Growth.
Jane Dodino, Local Democracy Officer.
Nicola Reid from Coastal Partners.
Alex Pryor from Coastal Partners.
Alan Banting, Development Management.
Good morning, my name is Kieran Latham. I'm one of the Council's planning solicitors.
Hi, I'm Councillor Robert New, Councillor for Cobham Ward.
Councillor Gerald Vernon Jackson, Councillor for Milton Ward.
John Smith, Councillor for Eastern Cranes Water Ward.
Good morning, Chair and everybody. Councillor Joe Hooper, representing Paulsgrove.
Hi, I'm Darren Sanders. I'm a councillor for Baffins, North Milton and South Copner, and I'm deputising for my colleague Lynn Stagg.
I'm Councillor Matthew Atkins. I'm a Cosham councillor and full-time member of the committee.
Thank you. And just to announce before we get going, that item 2 in the reports about Lakeside, the car showrooms, that item has been deferred at the request of the applicants. So approving, we get now on to the agenda. So we have apologies, and I've got them from Chris Atwell, who's not able to attend this morning, and we've not been able to get a standing deputy for him because it was only this morning, so we're very sorry about that. And then I have apologies from Councillor Lynn Stack, who's being deputised by Councillor Darren Sanders, and Councillor Judith Smythe. There's no deputy here for that, so we are a bit light this morning, but so long as we've got 3, we're okay. And I know Councillor Rob New has to go in about 1 hour's time. Councillor Vernon Jackson.
I understand that as also we have an apology from Councillor George Fielding, who isn't here.
I beg your pardon. I'm sorry, Councillor Fielding. Yes, you're correct. It's been written down at the bottom. Thank you, Councillor Vernon Jackson. So, members, have you got any interest in any agenda items today? I don't have any either. Minutes of the previous meeting, which was on the 21st of July.
May I interrupt you there quickly?
Yes.
Just for the committee's awareness, I've been advising Coastal Partners on item 1, and therefore I will be stepping out of the room so as to avoid a professional conflict. And in the interim, you will have obviously a planning officer's advice, or ultimately the city solicitor is available by telephone through Ian Maguire if you need further legal advice.
Thank you, Kieran. So the minutes are there from the last meeting, and I wanted to make a little note, particularly we've got the leader of the council here, and I think it was at, where's it gone? We just turn to them. It's on page 5, 59, it's 59.2. You notice an HMO appeal. So just to remind members, as I say every time, it is worthwhile, it is important that the committee challenges communal room spaces at least. As you'll see, that one there was successful, not always because because sometimes it's reported in the presentation that the communal spaces are the right size, but sometimes the configuration, the layout, and how it's put together is worth investigating and prodding to make sure that the intended occupiers do get sufficient space. So that was another one that the committee was right to tease out and has got right according to the planning inspector. Okay, anybody any difficulties with the minutes? So I'm proposing the minutes. Could they be seconded, please? I got Councillor Rob New first of all.
Yeah, happy to second them, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor New.
Chair, in terms of declaration of interest, just for the note, I have checked with the city solicitor about the coastal protection ones that are coming forward, because inevitably they have been through Cabinet beforehand, and as leader of the council I've chaired those meetings, and his view is that there is no conflict of interest.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Vernon Jackson. So now, Ezzy, I presume, on the update of planning applications.
Thank you, Chair. As of today, we've received a number of decisions. We've received 5 decisions which have gone the way of the local planning authority, and this was for an advert consent which we refused for 28 Mammon Road, and an appeal for 15 Montgomery Road, which was also refused, a household application which was refused for 1 St. John's Road, an appeal for 10 Baham Way, which was also a householder, which was also dismissed, an enforcement appeal, which was also dismissed by the planning inspectorate for 36 Campbell Road, which was the enforcement was part upheld and part amended, which regards the sash windows, UPV sash windows, and a cumulative impact of the porch. As of today, we have received the 2 appeals from the planning inspector with regards 2CV Road, and the other one is for 18 Penge Road. That's the end, Chair. Thank you.
Yep, thank you for that brief overview. If members got any questions about them, if they could follow them up subsequent to the meeting. So now we go into the reports, which you have in your agenda in front of you, and it moves us Wiftley, indeed the South Sea seafront, and the variation of the agreed plan. So I think Alan Banting is doing that one. Alan, if you would like to introduce your report, please.
Thank you, Councillor Hunt. Just get it on screen. While that's happening, there are some comments on the update sheets, including some heritage-related comments from Ben Cracknell. Also here today is Nikki and Alex from the Coastal Partners that will help with any technical questions beyond my knowledge on the scheme, if you have any. And the other thing I wanted to mention is you should all also receive a copy in your bundle. It is a letter received by the Coastal Partners and emailed directly to their design team following and in response to a community stakeholder group presentation. It actually doesn't say all that much about the scheme I'm just about to present to you. It does query why the South Sea Seafront campaign were not consulted, and my advice to you is that they were consulted. They were one of 26 interested parties that made representations on the original application that were re-notified individually on this Section 73 amendment. So, if we go to the first slide, please, Eze. So planning permission has already been granted for a flood defence scheme in December 2019. It's the same Red Edge application site covering 55 3/4 hectares and the frontage at South Sea of 4.5 kilometres. The bit that you'll be focusing on today is amendments around, can you just go back, forgive me, around the frontage in that aerial image at the bottom of the slide there, around South Sea Castle. Next slide, please. Many of you have probably seen this one before, but I included it again because up in that sort of top left corner it shows overtopping events, and in the fourth of those sequence of images is Bandstand Field underwater, part of sub-frontage 4 where the amendments are taking place. The other examples there are breach events, and they're not the only ones that have happened along the frontage. Next slide, please. So this was the scheme granted in December 2019 for sub-frontage 4. So you've got a widened promenade that's raised and a rock armour revetment with the high ground behind it being the secondary defence. Next image, please. That is essentially unchanged. In a nutshell, less rock and a wider promenade in the form that you see in the top image there. A 4-metre wide promenade at an upper level, 4 tiers of terracing, and a 6-metre wide lower promenade, and then the rock revetment beyond. Next image, please. It's really hard to try and show you the scale of the changes as a comparison, and I was kind of hoping this might be a little clearer. The image at the bottom is a full cross-section from the pinch point that you may be aware of the promenade. It, on my screen, is sort of a pink colour, but the rock armour is reduced, and beyond a sort of red line that I've added there, you can see sort of 2 layers of rock in the black superimposed over obviously a wider extent of rock sort of superimposed on that image. I won't dwell on that one. If you go to the next sort of series of images, so this is the scheme in 3D visuals. Again, I'm showing you visuals because trying to show them on 2D plans, you really don't see an awful lot of information. So here we are, Western End, near the Blue Reef Aquarium. Next image takes us to Bandstand Field. Next image, around Southsea Castle itself. Next image. West Battery. Next image. So this is where the upper and lower promenades split or meet, depending on perspective on that one. Next image. This is obviously at the lower promenade, looking at those terraces. Next image. So that's on the terracing, looking back towards Bandstand Field. Next image. This is just as a montage of the opportunities there is for some wildflower planting on the interface of the promenade with Bandstand Field, some informal play, which is basically some more rock. Typical materials are the aggregate concrete, and there is an image there of some swing seats that are proposed to be included, and includes a photograph of said swing. I think that image is from the Olympic Park in London. Last image, please, Ade. This takes you back to flood zone 1, where construction has, sub-frontage 1, where construction works have already started. The planning committee have considered detailed materials and other street furniture in November 2020, and there is an expectation that there will be a consistent quality of materials for future approval for this particular sub-frontage. Obviously, you've got a very detailed report, and in part is because it is the whole application site all over again. It is EIA development, for which there is an environmental statement. It's the same environmental statement as you will have had to consider back in December 2012, but includes an addendum to deal with the impact of the design changes to this sub-frontage 4 only. You've also got key responses from statutory consultees. Natural England note the environmental impacts either remain unchanged or see minor improvements, and Historic England summarise the design changes as an improvement and significant benefit to the scheduled site. Obviously, I've put all the details that I need to include within the conclusions there of how the ES and the addendum have been properly considered as part of this submission, and therefore the recommendation is written in the way that it is, that the committee confirm environmental information has been taken into account with all matters in the report, including comments of statutory consultees and all other material issues, and you're encouraged to grant conditional permission. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Banton. So we've got the representation, which you've all read. Other than that, any questions of the officers, please, members? Councillor Atkins.
I just wanted to be absolutely clear. I think probably everyone in the committee understands, but just for complete clarification, we've seen quite a lot of this report before and already given permission to a lot of elements of the coastal defence scheme. Today, it is a request to vary something which relates to the whole scheme, but in terms of the different types of sea defences used, but it's only proposed to change one section of the design we've already approved, which is the section around the castle, in order to create the two-tier pathway. Is that correct, essentially?
That's perfect. Absolutely.
Yes, and a lot of the things that were requested in the deputation are covered by the conditions. So, Councillor Atkins.
Yeah, that's precisely the point I wanted to make. I mean, I think the deputation makes an interesting and potentially good point, which I was going to ask about rock pools, and would this be a site that would be possible to incorporate vertical rock pools to enhance biodiversity, and does anything we decide today affect that?
Indeed, I asked this question in the pre-agenda and got a fair reply. But Alan, are you okay to answer that one?
So there is obviously a small concrete upstand wall of 600 mil, but that is behind a rock revetment. But there are enhancements of 90 rock pools going into the rock revetment. So there is net improvement in terms of environmental enhancement.
Yeah, and I was informed in the pre-agenda that the way that the rocks will lay will naturally create rock pools all the way along there, so the biodiversity is increased. There's less piling into the seabed too, so it does seem to be rather a win-win situation with this variation. Anything else you'd like to add, Alan, before I come to Councillor Vernon Jackson?
No, I mean, the report tells you that officers see this as an improvement. Obviously, the judgment for you is whether you see it as comparable or better, but our advice is the scheme is better.
Councillor Vernon Jackson.
Well, I've been lucky enough to be able to go and look at the work that's already been done in phase one, and it's really very, very high quality work. And it's been really good to see, and maybe it's something that the planning committee might want to go and look at personally to try to make sure that, what have I done wrong, Jane? You were waving at me.
I wasn't waving at you, I was just asking Councillor Sanders to turn off his microphone because the camera was on him rather than you.
Okay, sorry.
So the question is, will the committee go along and have a look? And
yes,
I encourage everyone to do that.
Hold on, Chairman. I've got about 97 other questions. So I think the work is very good. So I think if the committee would like to go around, I'm sure the people at the Coastal Partnership will happily facilitate that, because I think it's useful to see the work that's gone on in terms of making sure that that stuff is really historically fitting in with what is currently there. I think they've done a really, really good job. But I just want to check with Mr. Banting. Did you say there were 90 rock pools just on this section being added?
I said 90, but let's get it accurate and ask Alex if he could comment.
I can't be sure of the number if it's exactly 90. There are several going in. We've got several clusters of rock pools that will be installed within the rock revetment. The numbers I can't be sure off the top of my head, but I can find that for you.
The ones that I saw down on the first section were already being colonised by animals and plants, so they clearly work and worked very quickly, so that's useful. Thank you very much.
Well, since we've got you here, Alex, and Nikki, come on, let's just have a minute or two from both of you, since you've taken the trouble to come here and see us, to tell us all the glowing things about this particular variation. We'll start with Nikki.
Okay, I won't cover all of them, I'll leave some for Alex. Well, basically, just to give you a very quick background, the way the funding system works for the flood defence schemes is kind of phased because our scheme's so large. And that doesn't really fit with the planning system. So what we put in back in 2019 was based on the information we had at the time. When we had further funding released, that's basically allowed us to do a lot more work, a lot more survey work, a lot more modelling. So we see this as a real, I think you coined the phrase win-win, because it's a lot better for the heritage, particularly in terms of the weight on the tunnels within Southsea Castle. It provides a much better setting for the castle, particularly for the public realm, so people can sit and they can actually enjoy the views that, say, Henry VIII would have enjoyed. So it's really aiding with that interpretation. And again, the biodiversity. So we've worked really closely with Historic England as part of this, and I think their comments, in Alan's report, they see it as a big improvement as well. I don't know if you want to cover any technical sides?
Thank you, Nikki. Yeah, as Nikki says, there's been quite a lot of changes that we've introduced as the design has developed, and we've done more investigations and more modelling works. The real big changes between what was previously consented and what we have before us now is the changes around the castle, which comprise the split-level prom and terracing, and the reduced volume rock revetment. Building on what Nikki just said there, moving that rock revetment has taken a lot of pressure, a lot of load off the historic structures, which is a good thing. It's also helped us to deal with some identified issues with the subsoils in that area. So again, it's taken the load off that weaker soil and has allowed us to remove a sheet pile wall, which was what was previously shown in the previously consented design, with these sheet piles were about 20 metres long, driven into the revetment. By reducing the rock volume, we've reduced the need for stability. We haven't reduced the need for it, we've reduced the load upon the weak area, so we can take those piles out, which is a huge saving to the scheme. And it's also allowed us to introduce a split-level prom. So again, that introduces this. At the moment, we have that prom that runs by the castle. We'll now have two proms, the upper and the lower. It's a much broader public realm, much more thought paid to public furniture and the public enjoyment of the area. And the terracing allows people to sit and enjoy the theatre of the sea and go and appreciate the Solent in all its beauty and glory, which is a big improvement.
And we're going to get some new railings, step back a little bit toward the sea. So socially, aesthetically, it's a much better approach. Councillor Smith.
Yes, thank you. It's certainly aesthetically more pleasing in my opinion, and I can see from 2019 the improved engineering and everything else from the rock armour. Can you just confirm that that change in the way it's being constructed, its calculations have been done around the coastal erosion that might form as it might change because of the change in the way it's being constructed now?
So the structure's been designed for a 100-year design life, taking into account what we currently know about climate change and sea level rise and what have you. The revetment previously was based around the preliminary works we'd undertaken at the early stages of design. So as we've worked through the design and we understand more about the conditions in that area through undertaking more surveys and more modelling of sea level rise, wave modelling and also sediment transport and coastal processes, that has allowed us to fine-tune the revetment. So it does take up a lot less volume of rock, but it does as exactly the same job as was originally intended.
Okay, so unless there are any other questions, I'm going to move this report, the application to vary condition 2 of the approved plans, covered by all the conditions on the various pages at the back. Councillor Vernon Jackson.
Chair, if you're going to propose approval, I'm happy to second that.
Any other comments from members? Councillor Atkins.
Yeah, just to say, I think it's clearly a design improvement. It creates a nice sort of two-tiered effect. Both tiers, by the sound of it, or at least one of them will still, I think, be wide enough to incorporate shared space for cycling if needed. So I think there's really no downsides. And I think that it also incorporates a lot of the things actually that the community stakeholder advisory group are interested in. Just perhaps they don't appear quite on the plans as clearly as they do, but they are there, and I think it's going to be a big improvement to that section, and that's really what we're dealing with today. So I think I would say I support it as well.
Yeah, thank you, that's right. Councillor New.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to say I very much welcome the new proposed and amended designs. I think that we're going to end up with a world-class seafront, actually, as well as protecting our homes and city. And also, as well, I'd be very keen to take up your offer of working with the Eastern Coastal Partnership to go into a site visit to the existing works. I think, actually, it's really beneficial for people to see. I think there's some amazing things that are happening, least of all around the biodiversity side that we've discussed today. And yeah, I support what's before us today.
Good. So we'll all go along, roll our trousers up or whatever, and go for a paddle along the seafront.
I'm sorry, if you're going to do a site visit, you're not allowed to get that close to the sea because of the piling. So you have to wear hard hats and you have to wear construction boots. So no rolling up and paddling. I just want to check, just to make sure that people are clear. And Councillor Atkins talked about cycling. My understanding is on this part of the prom, that the cycle lane is on the existing place, which is on the road, not on this bit, because it is too constrained in terms of width. This is a real pinch point. So there isn't there is the two-way cycle lane on the whole thing, but not this bit. It's just set back onto the road. I'm just also picking up on Nicky's point that we'll be like Henry VIII. I hope that the Coastal Partnership will not be sinking ships in the Solent on a regular basis, so that we can feel like Henry VIII watching the Mary Rose go down. I hope we're watching ships go past nice and safely.
Well, I'm glad that officers are very happy. We also have to thank Councillor Hugh Mason for all the work that he's put into this, and people who supported him, and indeed all the officers. As Councillor Atkins said, it's a world-class seafront. Certainly evolved in the last 30 years, changed enormously from what it used to be, and for the better, I think. And this is, of course, one of the most important heritage sites in the United Kingdom, with Southsea Castle. There is no question that this variation better reflects the heritage site that is there. I think it improves it from what was from the proposition that we had before, so we're grateful for that. It's less rock, it's less piling, it's less interruption to the structures under the water, and I think it's going to be a great place. People are going to love to come there and have picnics, sit on the steps, look out to sea, watch all the ships and the Navy ships and the merchant ships go by, and the various ferries. So it's going to be a fantastic place for people to want to go and enjoy. I've no doubt we'll get some busking and all that sort of stuff down there, those sorts of things which we've seen as we liberalise our city a little bit more. Things that people used to hate, they all seem to love nowadays. Unknown verges and stuff. We used to get a headache about that. You haven't mown the lawn going up Copner Road. Well, now we let it grow. So people think differently nowadays, and I think that's reflected in what we're doing along the seafront. So that's it. So all those in, please raise their hand to show approval. And that is unanimous. So we move on then to item 3. And I suspect, Rob, you might want to go because this is going to take a little time perhaps. Okay? So whilst we watch Rob pack up there, no pressure, and we see him walk out the council chamber, thank you very much indeed for coming. Good luck with all your work today around Afghanistan. Okay then, who's doing item number 3? Miss Maguire. Okay, off you go then, Ian.
Thank you, Chairman. This is 12 to 28 Arundel Street in the city centre. The application is for a student purpose-built halls of residence and commercial redevelopment on the ground floor. So Part 7, Part 28, Part 21 storey building. You can see the site on the screen in front of you, the southern side of Arundel Street, immediately adjacent to the previous Debenhams building. We'll just have a flick through. So there's the site, thank you, Eze. The proposal, as I say, is a substantially tall building containing 591 individual study bedrooms for students and 3 commercial units on the ground floor. I'll just, as Eze just takes us through some of the images that I'm sure you're all fully aware of, we'll pause there. Members will notice, of course, we have slightly amended how we present things in your agendas, so we do have a lot more imagery in the agendas as well, so I will try and fly through the imagery to make it a bit easier. The ground floor, and this is arranged with Arundel Street at the top of the slide there, and obviously coming back round Yapton and Church to the bottom of it. You have 3 commercial units on the Arundel Street frontage and an area of shared back of house in the centre there, that orange block that's coming in from all sides. You then have obviously refuge, plant and cycle storage within the middle of the cores, and along the both eastern and southern side, you have the entrance and facilities associated with the purpose-built student housing. This does include a small basketball court on that southeastern corner. As we go up, the first floor, again on that eastern side, this is the facilities for students. You can see recreational spaces and study spaces facing outwards, and then the beginning of the mixture of study bedrooms on the first floor and going upwards. You will also note external roof terraces and an internal light well. It obviously goes up from there with the variety of mixed space. Some are individual bedrooms, some are studios, i.e. bedrooms with ensuite bathrooms sharing a small kitchen. Some are arranged in the cluster flat formation. Flick through those. As you go up, so we have another 7th story roof terrace there, and as you'd imagine, student bed spaces as we go higher still. Illustration of the issue. Key issue here for the design of the building. This is seeking to illustrate from those 3 bottom images the fact that the designer, after a lot of work with the council, has divided the building into sort of 3 different sections. It's a single building, but it helps perceive the building in that way for the views that it will have. The building fronting Arundel Street is a 7-story building, so it has a very human scale. Is relatable to those that are walking up and down Arundel Street and approaching it from the east and west. And the 2 towers that are set behind it of 21 and 28 stories equally will be viewed in those larger images. Some of these images you see here are also replicated in your agendas, and you'll see how they've taken some of the architectural detailing from the existing buildings within the city centre. As we flick through those, which I think are self-explanatory, I will just note there are no objections from any statutory consultees and 3 letters of representation raising concerns as mentioned in your reports. I will pause there. As you can see, it is a tall building, undeniably. Members will be aware that the law regarding tall buildings and building safety associated with fire safety are changing and have changed. The procedural issues associated with them affect only buildings that are submitted for planning permission after the 1st of August. So the procedural for considering fire safety for tall buildings is unaltered for this scheme, and it's what you have always done, which is obviously consider fire safety in the round and recognising that building regulations will match and control fire safety issues. We have worked closely with building control, and they are satisfied that all appropriate fire regulations within the building regulations have been properly considered. Keep going there. So the building is principally, obviously, it's in the city centre. It sort of straddles the 2 character areas in the 2013 city centre master plan SPD, which does support both tall buildings in line with our tall buildings SPD and focusing opportunities for growth and development that would encourage and transform the city centre's economic, social and cultural focus, as covered in the report. As mentioned on the ground floor, and you can see the corner of the building there, that's Yapton and Arundel, it has 3 commercial uses and then the entrance to the student space, so it's all active frontage all the way around, a big change for what we have along that eastern and southern elevation at the moment. 3 commercial spaces. I'm saying commercial, not retail, because as you know, the use classes order has changed and they're all commercial and service uses are lumped together now. So it will be for the site owner to market those and occupy them with either retail or food and beverage. A cafe could go in there, or indeed any of the other uses within use class E of the use classes order. As mentioned, we've had 3 letters of representation. One of the things raised in there was a concern regarding amenity. This just illustrates the degree of separation from adjacent residential tall buildings. We are satisfied there is therefore no unreasonable impact on amenity to those residents. It is a tall building, so it will cause some shadowing in Arundel Street, but there is obviously already shadowing in Arundel Street from the existing buildings in the area, and again we're satisfied that that's not of particular concern. The applicant has recognised and worked closely with the council's landscaping officers to look at the specific immediate public realm around the building. There's obviously some well-valued and high-quality public realm landscape in Arundel Street at the moment. Obviously, we're not looking to have that removed, but as we want to turn the corner and move back into an area which isn't publicly attractive at the moment and will become more active with this development. An individual negotiation has achieved a £50,000 financial contribution to the council, so that that money can be spent on improving that public realm on a series of illustrative schemes that the landscaping team have been working up. So specifically, a 106 payment would come for that. The scheme, as I say, has no objections from any consultees, so all the issues such as ecology and drainage and SUDs have been built into the scheme from its first principles and are entirely acceptable to your professional officers. Brief mention, microclimate, obviously all tall buildings have those impacts. This is just to illustrate that, remind me to mention it, I think. We are satisfied full microclimate modelling has been carried out. While there will be a little bit of additional wind coming around that corner, that's largely in the carriageway and is of no concern to officers. We are satisfied that that's not a reason to withhold planning permission. We've asked the applicant to try and pull this slide together. It is indicative, must stress that. This looks to show some of the other buildings that are in discussion or have been recently granted, as well as the existing buildings. So you can see outlined in red the site we're talking about today, on Arundel Street. Outlined in blue is the City Council's own scheme, recently granted and not yet constructed, for a tall building on Arundel Street. Yellow, a residential scheme going through discussions and renegotiation on Slindon Street, the old post office building. Green, the other half of that post office building, which is to be a hotel development. And purple in the middle there, the Debenhams building, which obviously will be a development site imminently as the landowner decides how to pursue that now closed retail store. The purpose of this is just to really to highlight the context that this is a tall building. It will be the second tallest residential building in the city, but this is an area of substantive change most recently, and going forward we do anticipate a need to put higher density, thus taller buildings in this part of the city centre to support economic growth, to meet our housing need and to regenerate and change the activity that the city centre offers the wider community. So while it's a tall building, we are entirely satisfied that it's both in its immediate context, that 7-storey building on Arundel Street, and in the longer views and wider townscape, it will be appropriate and will be one of many buildings one sees as one approaches the city or moves around the city in the skyline and cityscape of Portsmouth. Just flicking through my notes to make sure I've covered everything I wanted to pick up on. There is an extensive number of planning conditions dealing with both the specific management of the site and some details we're looking to nail down, such as architectural detailing of windows, etc. So we're satisfied that that covers all those necessary matters. I've covered amenity to neighbours, which I think is important. Would note highways impact, no objection from the Highway Authority, but there is a slight under-provision of cycle storage. There's 176 spaces for cycle storage within the building, so while that is slightly lower than the arithmetic of the parking standards SPD, we are satisfied that is a reasonable design for it. The ecology of the scheme, obviously both bird aware and the nitrate nutrient neutral solutions have all been built into the 106 and agreed with the applicant, and on top of that the site is liable for around £2.5 million of SIL, as mentioned in the SMAT, which obviously would deal with other infrastructure issues in the wider city and immediate locality. In conclusion, therefore, it's an ambitious building, but it's one we think that Portsmouth deserves. It deserves that ambition for its city centre, where we need to focus our growth and opportunity. It brings back a secondary frontage into active usage with those new viable spaces on the ground floor, and it provides for a need for the city, 591 student bed spaces, which is the equivalent of around 236.4 homes when we look to put that against the government standard methodology for homes, and will meet that need for both students and ideally will attract students out of poorer quality accommodation elsewhere in the city into this location where they can more easily access both the amenities of the city centre and of the university itself. The recommendation is on page 64, which is subject to the 106 agreement to grant planning permission.
Chair, thank you, Ian. And thank you for a very clear and cogent report. supported by the images. Very pleased with that. I just wondered before we go to question, whether you tease out that methodology that you mentioned in the last sort of paragraph about 2.5 bed spaces equaling one dwelling. If you just tease it out a little bit.
Yeah, certainly. Just very quickly, then the council obviously has an obligation to provide homes for all types, and we are given specific guidance on providing homes for elderly people and for students as a type of housing, and how we can account for that within our standard methodology. The government's standard methodology for housing need deals with dwellings as a unit number, and obviously student bed spaces or elderly persons sheltered or care accommodation doesn't fit that definition of dwellings, and indeed we classify student halls here as a use class C1, so a non-standard dwelling. Consequently, the standard methodology recognises this and has a conversion algorithm within it. Every 1.8 elderly person's bed space is considered to be one dwelling, and every 2.5 student bed space is considered to be one dwelling. So top of my head, 591 divided by 2.5 is 236.4. So that's why the equivalency of homes for the dwellings in terms of meeting housing need. So it's a student scheme. Well, it is capable of adaptation to provide something else. It is a student scheme for 591 student bed spaces, which is, as I say, around 240 dwellings worth of housing against your overall housing need over the next plan period. We just mentioned, Chairman, we do have a deputation from the agent as well to do before we get to questions and comments.
Thanks for that reminder. Yes, sir. What's your name? Because you weren't here when I first came out. I beg your pardon.
It's Michael Lampard.
Michael. Mr. Lampard, sir, would you like to give your deputation?
Thank you. So I'm Michael Lampard. I'm an architect. We work for Christopher and Wright. We're Fusion Students Architects, and I'd first like to thank Ian and Eze and Gary, who's not here, for the time they've taken with us to define and refine this scheme. And also thank you to the councillors for considering this today. So the application provides, as Ian's identified, student accommodation, 591 rooms in the centre of Portsmouth. We believe it's much needed in the city, helping to free up HMOs, as we just discussed. The student demand report identifies a continuing need for students in the city and good quality accommodation, which Fusion provide. As I said, we've undertaken extensive discussions with your internal team, so thanks for that as we've gone through the process. We've also undertaken a full day of design reviews, which was very positive and helped us again to refine the scheme. And we liaise directly with stakeholders and wider public through our communications agency, Marengo. So throughout the process...
I don't mind. Joe, beg your pardon. If you go out at this stage, you won't be able to vote on it. Is that all right? Sorry, I beg your pardon. I know you didn't. I saw you headed. I thought you might be headed for a drink of water. Is that all right? I'm so sorry.
The alternative also is that after the deputation we just adjourn for a couple of minutes, Chair.
Yeah. Would that be all right? I beg your pardon. Can we just hang on for a little break?
Yeah.
Joe, do you want to shoot off just for a few minutes?
Oh, I can go now?
Yes, I beg your pardon. I'm so sorry. Everybody knows what you're about to do. Well, hang on.
Could we perhaps let the deputy finish? I do apologise, Councillor Hooper.
Pardon?
Should we let the deputy finish first, perhaps, Chair?
She's on her way now. You know, hang on. Sorry, I beg your pardon. Sorry to muck you about. Right, thank you. We're resuming the planning hearing today. Back to Mr. Lampard, sir.
Thank you very much. I will start again, just to make sure I didn't miss anything. So, the application proposal will provide much-needed sustainable purpose-built student accommodation with commercial units on the ground floor level, helping to reactivate Arundel Street. It's near to the university campus and will help to free up HMOs for family and wider housing demands. We believe the student demand report illustrates that there is a continuing need for student homes of good quality. As a design team, we've undertaken detailed a pre-application process, including regular discussions with your planning officers, undertaken a day of design reviews with your panel, with Design South East, and liaise with key stakeholders through our public communications team at Marengo. The scheme has been developed and refined through feedback at each stage of this process. Even post the application submission, we've made further revisions to make the scheme better and better in consultation with officers to refine and improve things. The final proposals comprise a very high quality design, which we believe will supplement and support the city's ambition for high quality designs. The building has been designed to provide a positive frontage and activity at ground floor level and be attractive when viewed from a distance, as identified by Ian, with the 3 buildings, 3 streets design logic. The new retail commercial units will be provided on the entire frontage of Arundel Street, but also we're activating Slindon Street and Yapton Street significantly from where they are currently, as you saw from some of the early photographs. Those will be activated with student amenities and functions, including sports and a basketball court. We believe there are no significant environmental designations or constraints on the site, and the proposed development would not therefore result in significant harm. The heritage reports indicates less than substantial harm on the setting of any heritage assets, and we believe the public benefits derived from the scheme are considerable and include a sustainable BREEAM excellent development, including green and blue roofs, and a design that will exceed current standards, demolition and regeneration in the city in line with the master plan, delivery of 591 beds with social and learning spaces helping to reduce the current reliance on HMOs, provision of well-managed student accommodation and a facility to help the growth of the university. We believe this is a good architectural improvement to the area through a well-designed building and the creation of a good quality landmark. We're providing good quality external space which will improve mental health and well-being of people who live there, providing improvements to the public realm as identified and activity along Slindon Street and Yapton Street, making it a safer space as well. 3 modern commercial units for the city centre, given that the current units are not particularly good quality. Improved accessibility for delivery of appropriate desire line on Slindon Street, so really creating that route through from the station and visibility. Creation of employment both during the operation of the building and also during construction, and obviously encouraging more people to live in the city centre as well, creating activity. So we believe the scheme is in accordance with the NPPF and would result in a creation of a sustainable development and the delivery of much needed student accommodation in Portsmouth to meet the increasing demands of the university. And just picking up the final point which was raised earlier on about fire, Fusion are committed to providing A1 rated buildings, so this will be a masonry building. We'll have materials that meet all the current fire legislation, very forward thinking. So just again like to thank the councillors for listening to me, and also to Eze, Ian and the team at planning. Thank you.
Indeed. Mr. Lampard, before you finish, I wanted you just like to tease out a little bit about the sustainability, because I'm informed that if this wasn't, we're talking about white elephants here, you know, if this building, say, didn't want to become for students, but the apartments there would be able to be utilised for residential residential living.
Yeah, with all of our schemes for Fusion, we always look at how the buildings can be adapted if ever the student market changed, and we have layouts which we provided to the city which illustrate how the building could be converted back into accommodation, residential accommodation rather than student accommodation. So it's very flexible, it's very adaptable, and it wouldn't need considerable change really from where we are today. And again, it would work pretty well in that location. So yes.
Okay, thank you. Members, any questions of the officers? So Councillor Sanders, then Councillor Jovan Jackson, then Councillor Atkins.
Thank you, Chair. Ian, you said that this would contribute 236.4 homes to our housing target. What is our housing target for the 21-22 financial year?
So the housing target obviously varies depending on what buffer we're looking at. So when we deal with the housing target, we look over the full plan period. And over the plan period of the emerging plan that the Cabinet recently approved for consultation, we're looking above 17,500 homes, taking us up to 2036. So you're looking to do 856 homes a year, but that will be plus a buffer, and it will vary year on year over a 3-year delivery.
So it's roughly about 850 per year.
Plus a buffer on top
plus
of that.
Plus a buffer.
Yeah,
okay,
so ultimately is 1,000 a year.
Okay, fine. So this would contribute, if colleagues were to agree this would contribute about 24% of our housing target for this year. Okay, that's helpful. It is up to 28 stories. In paragraph 1.8, you give a whole raft of other applications that have gone through. You've seen them as well in the illustrations. This is taller than them, isn't it?
Yes, this will be the second tallest residential building in the city, after number 1 Gunwharf.
Okay. You mentioned later on the plan for the city centre and around tall buildings as well. Is there any limit on the number of stories that can be put in this area?
From a planning policy point of view, no, you do not have a policy that says we will not have more than X stories in the city. Obviously, from a practical design, viability and servicing point of view, there will be a practical limit on a side-by-side basis. As always, you're looking at the individual application and its individual merits. We are satisfied to recommend to you that the building of 7, 21 and 28 varied stories is appropriate for this location.
Okay, that's fine. I want to ask, Chair, if I may, I want to ask a series of questions as I go through the report.
Yeah, if you want to go down a theme, that's fine.
A theme?
A theme, whatever. Well, the questions you have to ask, I beg your pardon.
Okay, then maybe one or two. I'm interested in the comments of the Designing Out Crime Officer and also the Private Sector Housing Unit. If those comments were to be incorporated into the plan, and I think this is as much for Kieran as anything else, would that make the scheme unviable?
Just bear with me, I'll just go to
those
comments.
3.7, there's a whole raft of comments and observations from the Private Sector Housing Unit. You said that's not enough to overturn the application, but I'm interested to see that and also the comments of the Designing Out Crime Officer.
So the Private Sector Housing Officer have given some specific personal opinions. Many of them are accommodated within the scheme already. Others where there may be minor variations. I must admit I'd have to get the officer on the line to tell you whether every room is a minimum of 1.5 metre width. I would stress, however, that is not a planning policy. While that's a perfectly valid opinion that every room should be fit for its purpose, that's something you consider. I would obviously give a degree of consideration to that. Turning to the Designing Out Crime Officer, again, many of the general concerns raised there are fully accommodated within the scheme already. So obviously a closed-circuit TV system is required. Well, there is a closed-circuit TV system proposed and indeed covered within planning conditions. Things like mailboxes need to be a robust construction. You've got to draw the line on what role planning has in that degree of detail. Obviously, just common sense within it. Pretty much all of the comments, I believe, have been incorporated into the amendments. As has been mentioned, this is an evolved scheme through a number of iterations and discussions, and the case officer has confirmed while we've been sitting here that all rooms are indeed 1.5 metres in width, as an example of how those comments have been fed back to the applicant and positively responded to.
Okay, that's fine. So again, I think the answer to my question is yes, which is that it would be viable, but some of it may need to be a discussion within.
They're already in the scheme, so there's nothing further for the council to do.
That's even better. Thank you for that. Return to 3.39, which is waste management, and it's something that follows on from what Lee said earlier on. I don't see the word recycling in the waste management structure, particularly as they're going to do it themselves. Has the developer indicated that they're actually going to do some recycling?
I'm not sure we have in our waste management work from them. I'd have to check that with the case officer. As I say, obviously, again, we've had no concerns raised by the waste management team. These are not residential dwellings, so we don't collect them in the same way. They're commercially collected and thus fall for the applicant or the land manager and owner to manage with a private collector going forward. We are satisfied there is sufficient space provided for the refuse that this site will likely...
Could we put in a waste management condition submitted to the council? Is that what you're going to ask?
I'm asking questions at the moment. I may come up with some ideas later.
Yes, if I may say that the condition 30, the site development management plan, already has a requirement for waste management strategy during development as the first instance, and I think we have somewhere else a condition covering the management of all aspects of waste and recycling. I'm just trying to remember what number it is, whether that's 30 or 20.
It's just the recycling word isn't mentioned in the report.
Yes, it's condition 30, covers the waste management strategy, which obviously would cover recycling as a form of outlay.
Okay. I think we might want to include that.
Yeah, so we got some control by the sound of it.
Okay, that's fine. In 5.06, which talks about the retail units on Arundel Street, what happens if there aren't any takers? Which has happened to many a building in this city. The shops just are empty.
So, as I say, it's a commercial use class E, so for the market to put on there. We have restricted the changes of use away from use class E because the General Permitted Development Order does allow for a number of conversions of, and I'll use shops for shorthand, apology, shops to other uses, including residential uses. A condition has been imposed to prevent that happening without the prior approval for the council, so that we can ensure the market has every opportunity to occupy them. But as with all things, what the council can actually do is limited by reality. If these are viable shop units, we've gone back and forth with the applicant about how they can be created, making sure they've got that adequate back of house space, so they've got places to store their bins, etc., and so on and so forth. We are satisfied they are perfectly reasonable shop scale units for this sort of location within the city centre. It would then be for the market to respond. If the applicant is unable to occupy it, that's the same as any other commercial space.
So there's very little we can do if there aren't any takers. Yeah?
Indeed so.
Okay. I want to move on, if I may, to the principle of development and the need for the development here, which is, I think, is 507 to 520, effectively. And it was also mentioned by the architect as well. It's not about freeing up spaces for HMOs in the applicant's discussion. Given that there's obviously we can't deal with precedents here, have we got a rough idea of how many HMOs this would free up?
Well, again, I'll have to drag out a calculator, but HMOs vary in size, but 6, 7, 8 bed HMOs. Obviously, if you build 591 bed spaces, divide that by 6, and that's the number of 6 bed HMOs that you technically wouldn't need in a like-for-like scenario. As detailed in the report 5.10, obviously we do have the challenge, and the university very much has the challenge. It doesn't know what its future student numbers will be. It's a very changeable world at the moment. Remote learning will have an impact. Obviously, the university prides itself on direct delivery of teaching to students at a high quality, so they're not going to go to an open university set up tomorrow. There will always be that demand, and the university was growing effectively year on year, almost coming up to the pandemic. So we do anticipate that there will be a need for more student bed spaces coming forward. And this is the oddity associated with student housing. There's probably a need for it now, once the university is back and fully operational. If there's not, then it would be an alternative and extract 98.5 HMOs, there you go, that's 591 divided by 6, from that general need. So obviously, either way you look at it, it's either meeting a need that exists now, diverting students from a poorer quality offer to a higher quality offer, or if the market fails entirely, as has been mentioned, then obviously the applicant can come back and speak to us about converting it into an alternative form of development, and it would be readily easy to do so for general needs residential housing.
Thank you for that, Ian. I think that goes to the heart of people's concerns around any student housing development. And you also mentioned it in 5.11 as well, which talks about Kingsway House and the registry, which are things I'm mildly interested in. You talk around the change of use, we're talking about locage and age as factors limiting their appeal. what is the source of that particular comment as opposed to there isn't a demand?
I believe that's taken from the discussion between the case officer and the applicant in their presented information, providing that professional opinion on what to, rather than a specific document I can refer to. Again, I can consult the case officer if you do want to find out whether that's his expression of personal opinion or coming from a specific referenced document.
No, that's fine. And my final question, you'll be delighted to know, concerns recommendation 1.1. Which is something I've not seen before, but it talks about using it as students' bedrooms during the academic year, and then quotes for any person for a maximum of 2 months as temporary residential accommodation. This is more a question for Kieran, if I may. What is to stop the committee from saying, actually, instead of any person, it could be a discussion with the City Council about prioritising people who are currently in bed and breakfast? Is there anything to stop us from doing that? Would you make the scheme unviable?
If I may, and Kieran can confirm or deny this, what stops us doing that is it wouldn't pass the tests associated with the Section 106 obligation. We cannot make the applicant make his land available for a specific use. It's their land. We can stop him doing certain things, i.e. it's only for students or temporarily for somebody else, but we can't demand of the applicant that he houses people in bed and breakfast if he doesn't choose to do so. That would not pass the test of necessity to make this scheme acceptable under planning policy.
Okay. Yeah. However, presumably, we can make as part of the committee, we can make a request of the applicant. Is that correct? And not demand, but we can make a request of the applicant that it will be our strong preference.
Of course.
We just can't put it as a condition. Is that correct?
I think you've done that.
Sorry, mate?
I think you've done it already.
I may do it a bit later.
Yeah, so we cannot make it a condition or an obligation because both conditions and obligations are controlled by legal tests that are effectively in shorthand of necessity, but we can absolutely make a request either directly from, for example, the portfolio holder for housing or otherwise that we feel that this could be a beneficial conversation to have.
This is for questions I may come back in a bit. You'll be delighted to know I'm finished.
No, thank you very much indeed. It's all very helpful. Councillor Joe Jackson.
I shall be brief. Ian, are there sprinklers?
There will be in a building of this height, yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Joe Jackson. Councillor Atkins.
I wanted to ask briefly about the roof terraces and what consideration has gone into safety of the roof terraces. Will they be closed at a certain time? Is that a condition? And what about the kind of surrounding of them to make sure stuff doesn't ever come off them, either cans or rubbish or other objects or even students themselves? So do we have conditions that can control the safety elements of the roof terraces? So I think it's a good idea in general to give students outside space, but I do think it needs to be carefully safety controlled.
Yes, there's a number of conditions dealing with that. Just flicking through. Condition 11 requires further details of the roof terrace features, the railings, the glazing, the balustrades to be submitted for approval. I'm pretty sure, I'm trying to find it now. We have obviously we have a landscaping condition that will cover the same thing. We have another condition regarding which is condition 24, which explains what we are requiring in those roof terraces and does require them to remain closed and be vacated by all users between the hours of 200 and 900, 10 o'clock at night and 9 o'clock in the morning. They must be closed to all users. So we looked at that carefully throughout both the approvals and the scheme, and the intention is to have a 2.8 metre balustrade around them. We've also, just to be clear, looked carefully at the microclimate issues on the roof terrace to make sure they are safe and pleasant for users themselves.
Excellent, thank you very much. And just one last question sort of around safety. Are there going to be on-site staff all the time or during the day? Or?
Again, there's a management plan they have to submit to agree all those things, but yes, that is clearly the intention, and the applicant has explained that is their intention, but that would be covered off in that management plan that deals with all of the on-site management.
Excellent, thank you.
Did you want to ask any more questions, Councillor Sanders? Okay, so members, Councillor Hooper.
Sorry, it's Ian, isn't it? you may have explained to Councillor Sanders, but I'm just interested in digging into the nitty-gritty, the detail on this. How actually has this need for 591 bedrooms been proven? Because I appreciate we're in a COVID-sensitive sort of time. Obviously, we want students to come back into the city, but I'm just interested in how this need has been proven, and moving forwards, how that relates to sustainability and versatility of this accommodation. Because I think quite rightly, and I was a student for many years, I'm not anti-student, but local people are concerned when they see developments like this, and when they themselves are struggling to get housed. So I think we've got to look into the future. If this doesn't work for students, how do we adapt it for local residents? And also the gentleman over there admitted that, he spoke about plans for the sustainability. Are these available to view?
There's a number of different questions there. In planning, one does not need to prove the need. There is a presumption in favour of development. As a planning authority, you are obliged, under the guidance laid out in the planning policy guidance note, that as a strategic, I'll quote from a strategic policy making, authorities need to plan for sufficient student accommodation. So we need to recognise that student housing is part of our overall housing need, and the government has given us, as I say, arithmetic to how that fits into their overall assessment. So we have a number, a division of the 300,000 homes a year government wants to do, and part of that does include students. How they've done their calculation, you'll have to ask government about that. We get given that number rather than we produce it locally. As I said, we do know the University of Portsmouth has grown year on year. We've covered that off in paragraph 5.10 of the report. Exactly how many students they're going to need in the year this is completed building, we don't know. And to be honest, the university doesn't know, but they are a growing university and a high-quality university accordingly. So that's where the need issue comes. There is an overall identified need for students because it's a growth area, the same as an identified need for pretty much every type of housing in Portsmouth because it's obviously a growing city. In terms of the adaptability point, and this kind of deals with the worst case scenario. If that presumption is wrong, if government's got its numbers wrong, we don't need that part of our housing provision, well then no one's going to build a white elephant or halfway through building their white elephant walk away from it. We've asked them, is it possible to adapt these buildings to be a different form of housing, and the applicant has provided plans for that. I can't recall if they're actually on the website, but they can easily be provided to do so. They're purely indicative, of course, to demonstrate what it could be done. But yes, you can see quite clearly from the nature of the accommodation, it's quite easy to convert those student bed spaces into a number of different flats with different layouts should there be a drop of demand from students in the future. So as a sort of fallback worst case scenario, the applicant would obviously, as any sensible asset owner, wouldn't want you to sit there with an empty student block. They would be coming back and speaking to us to make those conversions if and when the market got to that point. But the best information available to us at the moment is that there is an unmet need for students because the university is growing year on year, and there has been movement in that market. As Councillor Sanders mentioned, a number of student housing schemes were converted over to other uses during the COVID period, so we do know that's moved around a little bit. The applicant has also confirmed that, the case officer has confirmed that the adapted plans are available on the website, so they're there in the public realm already. So the short answer is they don't need to prove need. We are satisfied, however, that there is a need from the best available information. I would add, even if that's wrong and there isn't a need, well, that means they're building student bed spaces that attract people out of HMOs into purpose-built student accommodation, which is a good thing for community cohesion and our balance within our communities. And if all of those things are not true, they are capable of future development and alteration to be residential, general C3 uses, to make an alternative contribution to the city. So we don't see there's any concerns about the nature or purpose or otherwise the general principle of the development for student housing within the city centre.
Okay, any more questions? Right. We'll move to comments then, and I'm going to propose this report for approval, subject to the 106 agreement and the conditions. I will say that it's been a thorough report, and you've all looked into it closely. And one of the things I would like to highlight is it was touched on by Mr. Lampard, was the hopeful migration or the anticipated migration of students from HMOs, local homes, into purpose-built managed accommodation, which is better for the students. Cities had and the university had a long-term goal to move all first-year students and foreign students, for want of a better word, into purpose-built managed accommodation, which is better for them and better for cohesion. And indeed, the other policy that runs alongside this is moving them closer to the university, which reduces travel and so on. So this is what this particular application does. And we can't have our cake and eat it. We can't complain that students are in HMOs and then not do student-built purpose-managed accommodation like this. We all receive those emails about HMOs, student HMOs I'm referring to, and then people can't complain to us and say, well look, they're in local family dwellings, we don't want them here. So here we are, migrating them to purpose-built managed accommodation. And we've heard the officers and Mr. Lampard point out very clearly that this won't be a white elephant, because if it doesn't work or the market changes, then this is easily adaptable to residential accommodation. The other benefit we've heard is this represents about a quarter to a fifth to a quarter of 1 year's housing target. And that was down to the hard work of officers over many years. I think it used to be about 5 student bed spaces for one dwelling, 5 or 7 I think it was, and that's been through speaking to the government reduced down to 2.5. The other thing I think is really important that got teased out today was how it relates to the ground and the quality of the materials that are going to be used. It has where it is around the ground floor has more of a gun wharf look to it than something we've been used to. So the quality of the materials, the design, are all about increasing quality and standards for our city. And I'm sure that Councillor Vernon Jackson might talk shortly about the money that we've secured for commercial road from the government to improve the public realm and how this might fit in with that. So I think that's a bonus as well, the £50,000 that will come into that, which has been going to be handed straight to the council in order to add to the work that we're doing around the public realm in the vicinity. So I'm very happy to propose the officers' report, as I say, with the Section 106 agreement and with all the conditions attached which have been discussed this morning. Councillor Sanders.
Thank you, Lee. I have to say I was minded to refuse this application until this morning. I find it difficult to look something that will meet 24% of the council's housing target for a year and will free up 100 family homes in the eye and say no. We know many people in the city complain that we are not meeting our housing targets, and isn't that bad? And I think it's very difficult to turn around and say, well, we're not meeting the housing targets, and then refuse this when it is contributing so much. And it's the first time I've actually heard any planning officer be as clear as Mr. Maguire about the impacts on that. And I think that is of some interest to me. I do think I would want to add a few things, though, if I may, which may go into somewhere it could be conditions or an informative. So I'm going to follow up on Joe's point, because actually many people are really worried that we're prioritising students and not normal people, as they see it. And I think the first thing we've got to do is we've got to understand that at the moment nobody actually really knows what the market is going to look like in 3 to 5 years for student accommodation. As someone who's had to authorise buying back student accommodation and utilising council money to buy back student accommodation, I'm fully aware that the market may not be as rosy as it once was. So my first suggestion to add is that we have a 3-year review, a review after 3 years of capacity. I think that will give us enough time to fully go through one full cohort of university people, but a 3-year review to see whether this can continue to be student accommodation. I think the difference for Councillor Hooper is that this is the first application that's actually looked as if it could be converted back into conventional accommodation. And that again is very different to many of the things that we've seen before, and I personally think very, very encouraging. So the first point would be a 3-year review. The second point would be specifically as part of the waste management to include recycling, including food waste recycling as well. The food waste recycling scheme is one of the things this council is doing that people are begging us to have more of, and I don't see any harm in adding 591 dwellings to that list. And then I think the third thing relates back to what I said earlier, which I suspect from Ian's slapping down of this earlier may wind up as an informative, which is to request as an informative that the applicant discusses with the City Council utilising the off period, for sake of argument, it'd be much better, Kieran, in legal language, but the off period, the non-academic period, for housing our homeless and getting families out of bed and breakfast, out of hotels, and into, it may only be for a couple of months, and I accept a maximum of 2 months, but actually into accommodation that could well be used for the very first time, could well be used for them anyway. I think that's something, and I'm happy to have a discussion with Kieran, who can turn it into proper legal language later. But I think that with those 3 things, I would be happy to second this proposal.
Okay then, Mr Maguire, if you could comment on the 3 conditions that Councillor Sanders has talked about.
Certainly, I'll comment on them in reverse order. So the informative, first of all, yes, well, obviously we can include that, that's not a problem. We can just pick that up in the final writing up, and obviously Kieran and I can speak to you, should members wish us to do so, and include that regarding that 2-month out-of-term period. Waste management, picked up in condition 28 at the moment, specifically does refuse and recycling materials. We can add food waste to that, so that's just adding the word refuse, recyclable and food waste materials to condition 28, so that's a perfectly easy clarification to add. The first one, and the reason I've done it in reverse order, you are being asked to grant a purpose-built student halls of residence. You don't have the privilege to change its use. The applicant, the landowner, decides how to use their land, and you have to judge whether it's acceptable. You can't come back and say, if I granted you a home and came 3 years later and said, no, you can't live there anymore, and turn it into a shop, you just don't have that privilege. It would not be a lawful condition to require them to do it. And as I say, I honestly can't see the necessity for it either. No landowner will sit on a vacant student block where the market is not going in that direction. They can adapt it. We have the plans they've provided for us, which we have illustrations of on the slides if you do want to see them. It's slide 73, as but you know, the market would automatically respond to that. There's only so far we can lawfully go as a planning authority and as a council to cover those issues. So while we can ask them to submit us a review after 3 years, it would be pointless. It wouldn't give us any information that we could act upon. So while you could technically provide that, I'm unsure what the planning reason and thus the necessity, the legal test for such a condition would be. If it is an insistence of the committee, you of course have that privilege, but I would just want to pre-warn you that in 3 years' time, when that comes in and it shows it's empty, that doesn't actually tell us anything, and I'm sure the landowner would happily give us that information voluntarily in any case, because they will obviously maintain ongoing relationships with us and with the university, who have a number of very effective partnerships in this area.
Just for clarification, Ian, it was actually to sit down with the landowner after 3 years and actually look and see what the development was looking like. So at least we have a milestone, which is there. as opposed to something that is indefinite. If they want to come back after 6 months and think this is not worth the candle, then they can come back after 6 months and say it's not worth the candle. But it wasn't us imposing, it was us sort of discussing, having a fixed time period where we can sit down and go, well, actually, is this going to work? Is this working? What does the market look like in future, rather than us telling them what to do?
So again, I would suggest that could easily be an informative and make clear that we are open for those discussions as and when they ever do it, and suggest that that should occur on a 3-year period. But to impose a planning condition, you have to have a legally robust planning reason, and I haven't heard one that I can recommend that you can employ that as a legal position. So on that basis, we can easily put that into an informative. As you say, if they've decided in the first year, the first term, this isn't working, I'm sure they'll be banging on our door in any case. But if we want to encourage them to come and speak to us, we can easily put that in an informative on the decision notice.
From my experience of doing with student blocks, it's probably a bit earlier than that. But I would be happy to put that in as an informative, as the express wishes of the committee, if colleagues agree, and also for it to be noted in the minutes as well, that this is the express wish of the committee. Thank you.
Okay, well, that can be noted in the minutes, and there's a legal opinion coming. Then Councillor Vernon-Jackson.
Thank you. For simplicity's sake, I'll also work backwards through that. So, to be clear, there will be an informative in relation to whether or not the Section 106 secured 2-month period could be used in any way to assist with the council's housing list. My personal view is that that doesn't necessarily need to be informative. It's probably better dealt with as a matter of cabinet member business to be taken as a matter of private negotiation. But if Ian Maguire is quite happy to include it as an informative, that can be done. Secondly, the waste management condition, Ian Maguire confirms that the condition can be adapted to include reference to food waste, I think it was. That's fine. And I agree with the comments in relation to the 3-year review of capacity. I'm not clear that there is a legal reason to require the applicant to come back and discuss this with us at this time. So an informative would be an appropriate way to deal with it, to make it known in a public forum.
I think you got about 75% of what you're looking for. Councillor Vernon-Jackson.
There will be implications for the motion as well, because he's amending, of course, your motion that you originally put forward, so I'll need to ask you to endorse and defend essentially first and second the motion again.
Sorry, the food waste additions in the condition 28 and the informatives on the 2 matters. Yeah, agreed. Councillor Vernon-Jackson.
Chair, could I ask Ms Maguire through you? I have to say I don't particularly like the scheme, but I think I'm a bit stuck on the basis that I can't see a justifiable planning reason to say no that would be sustained by government inspectors. And there's no point in us saying no to something when we know it's going to get approved by government inspectors, because it's just a waste of everybody's time, energy and money, and the potential is it'll cost council taxpayers in Portsmouth money if we are sued for costs. If I was looking for a reason to say no to this, what would your advice be? That's a sustainable reason to say no, not just doing it for the sake of doing it, but something where we have a justifiable hope of sustaining something at appeal.
So, like I say, with confidence, you probably have nothing on the use of it. It's an identified need. You have nothing really on the overall appearance aspects of the design. It's a high quality piece of architecture. It is, however, a very tall building, and that scale aspect of design obviously has a degree of subjectivity, and therefore different professionals will come to different opinions about how scale will express itself in a cityscape. We're satisfied that this is a very high quality piece of architecture and that scale is appropriate, and indeed similar scales will be necessary across the city centre to meet those needs. But that element of design always has an element of subjectivity, and therefore members will need to consider whether they feel this is making that positive contribution.
And I mean, if I'm not mistaken, this is an area of the city that's covered by the council's tall buildings protocol anyway. This is an area where if they're going to be tall buildings, this is where they should be. So we'll be a bit stuck even on that.
Yeah, this is in the tall building area identified in the SPD. Obviously, it doesn't say you can have this many stories in certain locations, but yeah, we do recognise and direct tall buildings to these locations.
Okay, thank you.
Members, any more comments, or Councillor Atkins and then Councillor Vernon-Jackson?
I've been, just looking at the, there's some street view and satellite pictures of the existing location here. And I'm asking myself, overall, do I want this building for the city or do I not want this building? And I'm coming to the conclusion, I think, on balance, I think it would be better for the city that the building be built than not be built. Now, I don't think any of us are sort of overly keen that it's student accommodation. We would rather see affordable housing. But I think one thing this applicant has done that does impress me a lot is has considered the possibility of conversion if necessary. I think this is an area that is in bad need of regeneration, and I think, as has been mentioned by others, this is a high quality design building, more of the Gunwharf style, more of the type of regeneration that would fit with the future regeneration of the city centre. And I think particularly the different heights and scales of the different buildings. So yes, the tallest part is very tall, but it's not here. It's not the whole of site. It's a narrow area of the site. I think overall will be attractive to the skyline and is suitable for a city centre location. This isn't on top of a lot of other residential housing. There is some other. I do recognise there are other flats in the area, but it's not, in a suburb. It is in the city centre. It will add much needed footfall to commercial road. I think the building is high quality, the design is high quality, and the management that we've heard about so far of how the building will be managed for students is of high quality. So I think this is a building that I think overall will benefit the city. I think something which was mentioned, and obviously SIL can always change as the building progresses and costs go up or down, but the idea of I think it was 2.5 million SIL for Charles Dickens is also extremely attractive. Even if it's a tenth of that, it's something we can do a lot with for that area and for other parts of that ward that could see the money improve. I think it's important that we do get some houses on the books that will actually be built, and this is a private developer with a clear plan to put the building up, whereas sometimes the city council has to look around for funding to try and get its plans up. So I think this is part of regenerating that area. This is going to improve the shop fronts and the quality of the shopping area in that area. I think it's going to improve the look of the area overall. It is very big, but I think it's going to improve the look of the area. Would we like it to be residential accommodation, affordable housing? We would, but I do think there is some element of truth to the idea that it could draw some students out of HMOs. I think at the moment what we're going to see in the city is something of a market adjustment, whether HMOs win out or these student blocks win out. I think they're in competition, but I do think that overall that there is some chance that student blocks win out, and I do think there will be an improvement for areas that have a lot of HMOs. So do I think there's potentially an over-provision coming in student accommodation? Yes, I do. But I think that this is a high-quality building in that location, and I would like the building built, and if it ends up converted to residential accommodation, fantastic. If it fills up with students and that empties HMOs, I'm also good with that. So on balance, I think that there is more benefit to the city than not in approving this, and so I'm happy to support it as well.
Well, thank you for that considered response. Councillor Joe Vernon-Jackson.
Thank you. I'm sorry, I'm slightly less optimistic than Matthew about this. I don't think there's a way we can say no to planning permission on this. I think government has reduced our ability to influence how buildings are built within this city, so that effectively they take the decisions, and we don't have the power to say no. I am sad that is so. But I also think we need to be aware that the number of houses that government are imposing on us, and we have to be clear, it is not our target, it is not something we produce, it is a target imposed from London by the government, mean that we will have to be building more and more tall buildings. So having seen what might happen in the city centre, we might be looking at 40 buildings this tall in the city centre, because the government imposed a ludicrous housing number on us of having to build 850 houses a year on an island city with water around it. It is mad, undeliverable, and reduces our power to say no to things that are wrong. So it is with some sadness I think this will go through. I don't think it is in the best interest of the city, but I think the government give us absolutely no choice, and our hands are tied. So I regret that, and I don't think it is the right thing for the city, but unfortunately, because the government are choosing to impose so much house building on Portsmouth, that we will get more and more of these applications that are not great for the city.
Indeed. Well, thank you very much for making that point, which we're all very much aware of right now. So there we are. Members, we've got Councillor Hooper.
Yeah, I just want to pick up one point. This just, for me, some of the assumptions that have been made here today are feeling a little bit dogmatic, because when I was a student, I actually wanted to move in with my mates in a house, share facilities. I wouldn't necessarily want somebody else making the decision, this is best for you, go and live in this tower block. So I think we've also got to consider in the real world that students also have a choice, and some of those people might be happier living in what we would traditionally call an HMO. Also, I agree with Councillor Vernon Jackson. There's probably no material planning reasoning here that we can turn this down. But what I'm going to say is, in the real world, politicians deal with people, and we deal with perceptions. And, as residents in our city are struggling to get housed, Darren's referred to people in bed and breakfast, we've obviously got, homeless people. This, in the real world, when we're thinking about perceptions, can be seen as insensitive when some of our residents are really struggling. Also, I will say, talking about quality and standards, I thought you were going to say something about the regeneration of the High Street, Councillor Gerald Vernon Jackson. Talking about... No? Sorry? Okay. Or the regeneration of Commercial Road. Over the years, we've seen it go down and down and down. Just looking at quality and standards, this changes the skyline significantly. Okay, I appreciate that we are going to potentially have to build up to provide enough accommodation, but for me it's obtuse and vulgar in appearance. I know it's not probably a material planning concern, but such buildings also make me a little bit nervous. I think earlier on, Councillor, oh God, I've forgotten your name, dear. Councillor Atkins referred to, safety issues with this building. So, yeah, that's just my own sort of subjective view. We probably can't say no, but, I'm certainly not welcoming this with open arms.
Okay, so a couple of things there which, from my own experience, so I don't want to widen the debate, but I think the competition is shouting at the HMO market to raise its standards, raise its game all the time, and we see that in application after application here at the committee. Compared to what they once were, some of the things that we saw previously were outrageous. So people who run a business with HMOs, they're going to have to improve their standards if they want to attract students. Students will still have a choice, won't they? They don't have to go here. They can go to the HMO. So they'll be looking for the better quality, higher standard HMOs. And we are seeing a number of HMOs go from simple HMO use to a combined dwelling use with HMO, and we see that application after application as the market changes in Portsmouth and standards increase, which is a lot of the work has come from this committee. As to the 17,000 homes we have to build here in Portsmouth, over 17,000. My understanding that's the starting point, 17,500. That is the starting point and could easily just as easily go up. That's equal to 85 tower blocks of 200 flats. So this is what we have to do. We don't have any choice in the matter. This is a a promise from the government in its election manifesto to build 1 million homes across the United Kingdom. So this is our part of that. So that fire has to be aimed outside of the city, and the council, previously, all parties have got together and said this doesn't work for us, this is madness, and in a number of notices of motion in the past already, everybody's joined together unanimously to say to the government, this 17,000 is ludicrous, it's ridiculous was the word. So that has been done and continues to be done, I think, cross-party. So that touches on that issue. But we are faced with the prospect of delivering 17,500 homes, and we've seen a part of it this morning. But having said that, so we now move to the vote. All those in favour of the...
Councillor, may I just stop you there?
Yes, all right.
That was a little bit more complicated, so I don't need to rush into that. As I perceive it, you originally proposed a motion. Councillor Sanders then purported to second it, but I think what he actually did was ask for amendments to your motion. So you never got a seconder for that original motion anyway. You then came back to me and confirmed that you had accepted a motion with 2 informatives and an amendment to condition 28, as suggested by Councillor Sanders. Could Councillor Sanders now confirm that he seconded that motion, or seconds that motion?
I can.
Thank you very much.
There we are then.
That is the motion before you.
Thank you very much. Members, that's been cleared up. All those in favour of the motion, please show your hands by raising them. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All those against, please raise their hands, and all those abstaining, please raise their hands. So that's 1 abstention. So that is carried. Thank you, Mr. Lampard, if you can report that back. Thank you for coming today, sir. Members then, we move on now, quickly, if I turn the pages over, quick enough. Is it number 4 we're on, gentlemen? Ladies and gentlemen.
For those with us on paper, it's page 92.
Yes, thank you, Gerald. Here we are. So on to Tregaron Avenue. Thank you both very much for waiting so long. I hope you found the debate interesting so far. So who's leading on this one? Ezzy, did you need a slight break at the moment? We've got to have a slight break for a minute or two, and then we'll resume after that. Okay? Okay then everybody, Jane, are we live again? Kieran, everything okay? Okay. I don't envy anybody who has to sit in this chair for a long time. Really awful. I'm sitting on a piece of wood, really.
It's designed that way, Chairman, so that the Lord Mayor does not go to sleep during 14-hour council meetings.
Yeah, it wouldn't be possible. Here we go. So there we are. We've moved on to, in your reports, report number 4, which is 28 Tregowan Avenue. And is it Ezzy you're doing this one? Ezzy is introducing this report.
Thank you very much, Chair. The application is for 28 Tregowan Avenue for construction of a pitched roof two-story rear extension, which measures at 4 meters depth at ground floor level and 4.7 meters depth at first floor level. And this follows the demolition of existing conservatory. Chair, can I please refer members to SMART, which officers have put further conditions recommended following the publication of the report. The recommendation remains unchanged with additional condition concerning frosted glazing. Chair, I can also draw members' attention to an imagery which we received from Mr. Gross, which members might have had sight of. This slide shows the application in relation to a two-story dormer detached property which was constructed around about the early 1950s on the west side of Tregowan Avenue. It lies immediately north of the Masjid Avenue and shares a common boundary with 4 dwellings on the avenue where there are rear elevations and gardens facing the side of the application site. The area is residential in character and the many two-story semi-detached and detached dwellings. The reason why this application has been brought to the Planning Committee for Consideration, Chair, is because we received a deputation request from a local resident. The main consideration with this type of application is design and impact on residential amenity. What we have received and when this application was put forward, a number of objections from nearby local residents and neighbors, especially those to the south, where we received 4 objections. And the objections mainly refer to the act of keeping of the development in question, the proximity to the neighbors' boundaries, the use of render rather than current natural brick, which would make it more compatible with the host property, and the loss of daylight and sunlight, and including, lastly but not least, the loss of privacy to rear gardens. This application, as presented, had before officers had looked at these objections, the case officer, I believe, had gone back to the applicant and requested further amendments to the scheme, mainly a reduction in the depth of the proposal and also the materials removing from render to materials compatible and similar to that of the existing property. Officers have considered the issues and main considerations which I've said previously and the neighbors' representations, and looked at the depth which can be seen in this slide. I said 4.7 meters the first floor element of the proposal, and the 4 meters depth of the ground floor element of the proposal. An officer's view or considered opinion is that the impact on amenity is mitigated, especially with the reduction in the depth of the elements, and also with the materials that have changed to make it more compatible with the host property, and the property in the question, the proposal in question, is due north of these gardens to the south. And the depth of the gardens of the neighboring properties and the depth of the garden of the property, of the application property, were all taken into consideration in officers putting to members a recommendation for conditional approval of the proposal. Thank you, Chair.
Okay then, so we've got two objections here and the applicant himself. So we'll start with Mrs. Sadden and then Mr. Goss. Okay, which one's Mrs. Sadden? Off you go, sir. If you just lean forward and touch, there's a panel over there, and touch the button, and a red light will come on your microphone. You've got it.
Could I ask if it's okay, Mr. Goss go first? He agreed to that. Yeah, that's okay. Thanks very much.
Thank you for letting me speak at this planning meeting. I have prepared a PDF document that I just want to make sure that you've got. And I prepared that from a photograph that I took from one of my upstairs bedroom windows, and using very basic mathematics and my computer skills, helped by my children, I've overlaid the perceived and the planning, I've overlaid the extension that's been planned there, so hopefully give you a visual.
Sorry, can I stop you there? Do we know each other?
We possibly, yes.
From a previous work,
yes.
Or not?
Yes, Mr. Hunt, we do.
Yes, so I'm going to have to declare an interest, because Simon was in the job with me.
But I think Kieran can advise on how close an interest it is where you need to...
I mean, we both aged a little bit. Apologies, and we had masks on, so I'm sorry. I didn't recognise you.
Kieran, can you advise?
So you're telling the committee that you worked with this gentleman some time ago?
Yes, I did.
How long ago?
Controls and so on like that. So I'm aware of him, and...
So would you describe yourself as close friends, or...?
Not close friends, but, I think the perception would not be good.
And how long ago was it you worked together?
Must be 20 years ago now.
On that basis, I would advise you've got a personal but non-prejudicial interest. It's enough that you've declared it to the meeting that you once knew each other, but you have no particular contact or feeling on a social level or anything else.
Yeah, I still don't think it looks good, so I'm going to declare an interest, so I'm going to have to leave this one to somebody else. So you need to elect a chair.
We don't have a vice chair here.
You need to elect a chair between you.
Yes, you need to elect one.
I'm happy to chair it if that helps.
Yes, thank you very much indeed.
But I'm happy for anybody else to do it. No, is that all right with colleagues? Is there?
Okay.
In which case, can I chair it from here? Because I think then I don't have to clean everything that's gone before.
I think that's required.
Okay, Mr. Goss, I'm very sorry. I haven't worked with you. Not that I know of, nor have I been arrested by you. As far as I know. So, Mr. Goss, thank you very much for coming, and you get 6 minutes. I don't have a stopwatch on me, but I'm sure that my colleague Jane will tell us when your time is up. So if you'd like to start again, thank you very much, Mr. Goss.
I can confirm that I have not arrested you, so... Yes, I live at 31 Mansford Avenue. You've all got that piece of paper with my anecdotal representation of what this extension provides. That was taken from an upstairs window in my premises, and shows how impactful and how huge this development is. Of all the properties in the vicinity of 28 Tregowan Avenue, in relation to all my neighbours who have rejected the planning application, my property is the one most affected by this huge extension. The reason for this is because the rear of our family home faces north and directly at 90 degrees to the southern and largest aspect of the proposed development. I'm aware of the submission of the amended plans where the size of floor 1 and the roof have been reduced by 1 metre. It is my submission that this modest reduction does not in any way deal with the comments made by my neighbours and I in relation to the loss of outlook, enclosure and overbearing nature. I accept that Mr and Mrs Harris wish to extend their chalet bungalow, and I wish to reiterate that my objections are not directed personally at them. The bulk and size of the proposed extension is so great that it affects both our property and the garden. And working from the scale attached to the submitted plans, the existing area on the southern elevation of 28 Tregowan is approximately 58 square metres. The proposed extension has an increased approximate area of 83 square metres, and this equates to a massive increase from approximately 25 square metres and a 43% increase. This is all on the southern aspect of the property, and it's especially this aspect and the height of the proposed extension that it directly affects our property and that of our neighbours at 25, 27, 29 and 33 Mansfield Avenue. I do not object to the development on the ground floor. Mr Lancaster, the case officer, makes comment that the plans are not out of character for the area, and whilst I accept that other properties in the area do have similar extensions, we are unique in that our property sits at right angles to the proposed extension, and therefore we are greatly affected by the extension. If we were situated in Tregaron Avenue and running obliquely, then we would not be that badly affected. I further disagree to the comments at 5.2 and 5.3 in the report. Currently, the property is a single-storey conservatory. It is proposed to replace the conservatory with a two-storey extension plus a tiled roof. This is a huge and disproportionate increase in size, most notably in height. The close proximity and the height of the extension will leave us feeling hemmed in and oppressed with a greater feeling of enclosure. I'd also like to question some of the transparency in part of the relevant planning process. The case officer's proposed decision report appeared on the council website, possibly in error. In that report, the case officer mentioned that he negotiated with the applicant who agreed to remove the Juliet balcony from the plans. There was no mention of a Juliet balcony in any of those plans, and therefore I've not been able to pass comment on that. And it is somewhat suspicious that there's negotiations going on between that I'm not privy to. The architect, Stephen Andrews, states the proposed extension is sited well away from neighbouring properties with good boundary screening. I dispute this. The distance from my boundary fence to the property in question is 0.76 of a metre and appears on the plans to decrease in distance. Furthermore, the application house is on land slightly raised from ours, and that accentuates the enclosed effect. The distance from the rear brick line of 28 Tregaron to the boundary fence, i.e. westwards from the back of the property, extends beyond my boundary fence of number 31 and 29 Mansfield Avenue. Therefore, the extension completely encloses our rear garden with a massive expanse of house, even with a reduction to 3 metres in floor 1 and the roof. The proposed extension worsens the perceived closeness of the property, outlook, and has a negative enjoyment on our property and garden. In effect, the outlook of our garden and rear aspect from all windows and from standing in the garden will be overwhelmed by this huge two-storey extension. My last point is that whilst we can look at maps and we look at mapping, I think that the only way to truly understand the scale of this extension to my property is to have a site meeting. I know there are issues with COVID, and I think that they can be managed, but if my PDF document doesn't properly show how big this extension is, then my submission is to ask for a site meeting. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Goss. If we can move to Mr. Sadden now. Welcome, Mr. Sadden, and you have 6 minutes as well.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name's Andrew Sadden. I lived with my wife at 29 Mansfield Avenue, the attached semi to Mr. Goss, for 28 years. We moved around the corner to Tregaron Avenue, but we kept hold of the property, and our tenants have expressed concerns and objections about this development. Also, we support Mr. Goss in everything he said there, and that's upset my reading here really, because it's a duplicate, so I'll try and shorten it. But firstly, that's my wife and I. My wife's above us checking what's happening. We do appreciate the applicant's need for an extension, and believe that it's possible to find a fair balance in this case. If you look at the pictures there, look at the amended line to get the latest plans, of course. The 3 main points we would like to put across for the committee to consider are the disproportionate harm that this development will have on Mr. and Mrs. Goss's property at number 31. a site visit is necessary to thoroughly assess loss of amenity, and we are not clear on the proposed conditions on permission regarding the possible permitted development being carried out during or after the construction. In this case, we're referring to the Juliet balcony, which Simon's already covered, Mr. Goss has already covered. We've no objection to the ground floor plans. The amendments to the original plans, in our opinion, mitigate most of the negative effects to other properties, except in the scale of things, they make minimal difference to the Mr. and Mrs. Goss's property. If this extension is built, as Mr. Goss has said, it will extend totally across his rear boundary and extend behind even the upper floor level will extend behind the 29 where we used to live. Although the measurements taken by the planning officers may be, from my research, just within guidelines, particularly the 12 to 13 metres from the back of Mr. Goss's house to the extension, bearing in mind it's raised land as well. This is on the borderline of giving planning permission, we think, but this case cannot be assessed, of course, just on that. It can't be assessed thoroughly without a degree of subjective judgment is used, particularly as the unfortunate, although we don't want this to be put down to unfortunate, we want this considered, but it totally screens the rear of Mr. Goss's property. So regarding outlook from Mr. Goss's property, all four windows in first floor and ground floor, habitable room windows, there's no loft windows, are squarely on and central to this extension and property. Therefore, the outlook is difficult from normal viewing angles. If you in day-to-day living in their home of 25 years, looking or glancing from all normal viewing angles from their windows, they will see brick and wall and roof and some sky, because that's been assessed as okay for, I believe, for light. In addition, the sense of enclosure and the oppression of dominance would be uninspiring and severely affect the enjoyment of the property. Also in that photo you'll see next door's garage, which actually it overhangs, the guttering overhangs Mr. Goss's property, which was done by agreement years ago, I think, gives extra sense of confinement. And if Mr. Goss was to think of extra extensions on his, he's only got a conservatory there that's about 10 metres from the proposed development. If he decided to have a substantial extension himself, he wouldn't be, well, this would limit him, certainly for outlook. Despite all this, in this case, to have a large mass of building concentrated on the total span of one property's boundary is not reasonable, when reasonable sized rooms could be achieved with physical setback of this long elevation, a setback of some kind to alleviate not only the mass, break up the mass of the wall, but to give Mr. Goss an angle that is more likely a glimpse at least of an outlook past the house. He doesn't expect the view,
Mr. Sun, can I ask you to bring your comments to a close?
Okay.
If you've got anything else really important to say, get it in now.
Okay. So the relative span of the resulting building, the span is probably in relation to the width of Mr. Goss's property and the magnitude of the change, which he's given you an idea of, should hold considerable weight in the overall assessment. So basically, that's thanks for listening.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sun. Can I ask you to push your button and to turn the microphone off? Thank you very much indeed. If we could now move to the applicant, Mr. Harris, welcome.
Hello. So thank you all for your time today. Can I just ask on the red outline, is that the one that's already on the application online? The red outline that you've given?
There's two versions. One was the original one that I did, and then there's a second one with the setback of a metre.
Yeah.
So it depends which one they've got. Hopefully they've got the current one. That's the one I sent in.
Perfect. Okay, perfect. So, if I've understood correctly, we're only here at this committee meeting today because of a deputation request made to the planning committee. Back on the 16th of April, the MIS report was released and there was no call in by members of the council for our application to go to committee. That deputation request was actually made by number 12, Tregaron Avenue. Just so everyone's aware, number 12 Tregaron Avenue is at the other end of our road. It has nothing to do with this application whatsoever, and obviously he's here supporting his friend. I'd like to make everyone aware that when submitting this application, the planning application for approval, we made sure this would actually have minimal impact on our neighbours. We also had a shadow analysis report done in which it showed if there would be any shadowing caused by our extension on all neighbouring houses. The shadow analysis analysed March, June, September, the whole summer at 8 a.m, noon, 8 p.m. It showed that because of our neighbour's house being east-facing, there was no shadow whatsoever caused by our extension to the neighbours. We originally said that we would render the left-hand side of the extension to keep it in keeping with our neighbours at number 33 Mansfield, who have a yellow rendered house. Number 33, who have the yellow rendered house, subsequently complained, saying it wouldn't be in keeping and they would prefer brick. So we said, okay, no problem, and we changed it to brick. Even though there was zero shadow from the shadow analysis, we once again agreed to decrease the top floor of the extension from 4 metres down to 3 metres. Next door but one to us, number 24 Tregaron Avenue, is doing a whole house rebuild. 4 metres off the back, 3 stories high, front and rear, which is significantly bigger than our 2-storey side extension. Number 24's has been approved, meaning ours certainly isn't large in size and scale in comparison to others being built down our road, definitely not. So I just want to stick to the facts. So we've agreed to change everything that the planning department has requested we make, change render to brick, make the top floor 3 metres rather than 4 metres. We've made sure there's no loss of daylight through shadowing to our neighbours. We hope that everyone can see that we've been cooperative here. We simply want to build our side extension. This extension doesn't go across the whole back of the house, to make our 3-bedroom home a 4-bedroom home, as we've just had a new baby. This would make it the same as most of the properties in the top part of Tregaron Avenue, which are actually 4 or 5 beds, and we have a larger plot than most. So that's it. I'd like to keep it short and sweet, but they are the facts. So thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Colleagues, first thing I think we have to do is to ask if there are any... can we turn your mic off?
Sorry.
Thank you. Colleagues, first thing is to ask if colleagues have got any questions they would like to ask. Councillor Atkins.
I did see, maybe I missed an internal floor plan. Can we see an internal floor plan of the extension? I was curious to see what it's adding specifically to the house.
Councillor Atkins, does that answer your question?
So members, if it assists, just because couple of comments there without the microphone. Also, it's the ground floor on the left, absolutely. The first floor on the right, you can see the top right, the existing first floor, how with the dormer window set into the roof slope, bedrooms 1, 2, 3 are inside that issue. As you can see on the bottom design, that changes, and we're looking at dormer windows, there we go, at the elevation still on the far side of the house, but the vertical wall and standard gable on this new side extension.
I have a couple more questions, if you don't mind me carrying on. One of the deputies has submitted, I don't know if the planning officers have seen it, the picture of the red picture, and basically showing he's superimposed the extension onto the garden. Now, I've had a quick look online. It looks to me like it's roughly accurate. Would you agree that because the extension does appear from the plans to extend beyond the boundary of 31? So it is. Do you have any issues with it? Would you comment on it in any way? Do you think it's an accurate representation of what the view will be like from 31 Mansfield?
Yes, Councillor. I think the clear marker there would be the panels, the fence panels, which we all know are 6 feet by 6 feet. So that will probably come out at 3 meters, just roughly 2 meters each panel, and with the supporting pillar there. And if we were to take the cue from the upper floor, which is being the eaves, or the upper floor, I'll just put that up. There. So if we take the first floor element being the marker there from the rear being the eaves of the existing first floor, and we to look at the panels and if we to look at the panels here, one could then take a cue about what is 4.7. It would just marginally go across the shared boundary with the neighbor there. But otherwise, I do not believe that it would go to the extent that's put us in the imagery.
It's somewhere closer to that wasn't really a question, I'm just musing myself. I think it's broadly speaking close to accurate, but maybe slightly larger. Would that be a fair comment?
If I can, I'm just quickly measuring this image as it's handed to me. The eaves extension, so the elongation of the elevation is roughly the existing eaves duplicated, so it's twice the length of eaves. So this drawing does exaggerate the scale somewhat. It is a photograph prepared by a neighbour with perspective built into that, so I don't want to go too far. I think it does exaggerate somewhat the scale of the proposal, but it is undeniable because the existing building does cover a lot of the neighbour's plot already, that it will result in a two-storey wall across the majority of the rear elevation of this back garden. That's how members should consider it. That's how officers have looked at it. We are satisfied that is not an unreasonable impact in this sort of character area to have, but clearly that's the key decision for members to make. So I wouldn't be too hung up on the accuracy of the drawing. I think it might be, say, a slight exaggeration, but it is undeniably a large two-storey wall, obviously not quite doubling the full width of the house, but doubling that top eaves piece that you can just make out in this image. As if you can go back to the side elevation. You can see there the existing eaves width either side of the chimney, and you can see that additional one. Again, it's pretty similar. Again, from the edge of the eaves going forward. So you can picture that both in respect of the images provided and your own interpretation.
Thank you. One quick final follow-up related. And just to say, I'm not in any way suggesting the deputies in any way tried to mislead us, or that the picture isn't. I'm accepting that it is effectively like a solid wall across his boundary fence on the basis, as the picture broadly describes. But it essentially says in 5.8 Officers considered the depth of the extension as originally proposed to be a little too much with respect to the neighbour's outlook to the south, and the applicant agreed to its reduction by 1 metre. And I accept also that the bright render was taken away, which is an improvement. There's a slight vagueness to that statement in the sense that it says a little too much. Is it open to the committee to consider it's still a little too much, or do you feel that you've now dealt with it as a result of the discussions and negotiations that have taken place?
Yes, I'll do it. If I may, members, just say, I think officer reports are written for the audience, so yeah, obviously the language there it has a little bit of vagueness. It's not just the depth that we're looking at there, it's the architectural interest. A straight up and down two-storey wall has a visual interest compared to what we now have, which is a bit of single-storey roof form coming into there, which they have now with the existing conservatory. So we're satisfied, as well as the change in the depth itself. 1 metre doesn't actually make really that much difference, but it's creating greater interest in that architectural elevation in that you do have that chamfered corner. If members feel that it is dominating the outlook such that it causes significant adverse harm to the amenity of neighbour, remembering, of course, it's not the view that is relevant, there is no right of a view in planning, but if literally the enjoyment, the reasonable enjoyment of that home is so detrimentally harmed that plan permission should be withheld, notwithstanding their current appearance, then plan permission should be refused. But clearly, at some point, it's not worthwhile the householder making the extension if it isn't a gap in there. We're satisfied that coming out that 3 metres as is now compared to the previous scheme isn't causing that dominant harm that would require refusal. But that's the judgment simply that members need to make.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Smith. I just wanted to talk a little bit about the use of finishes there, because I must confess, when I first look at any sort of plans, I look at the plans first for us to read into the detail, and looking at that wall mass, the first thing I was thinking, you put a render on it. Well, obviously in the report it says then about a render was used, and then it went back to brick because this is much more of a red brick area. I just wondered whether, while we're talking about this, whether use of finishes might soften it if we were minded to approve it.
Yeah, as always, architectural detailing is a challenge in trying to settle the correct approach. We have imposed a condition requiring that the materials to be used on the external surfaces should be submitted for approval, condition 3. So notwithstanding that shown on the plans, we are able, apologies, I'm misreading my own condition. We are requiring that they match that brick. We can amend that condition if members felt render was more appropriate, but as we say, it was in response to local concerns. To respond to the architectural comment you've made, render is often quite useful if it was flipped the other way around. So where you are looking at a shadowing issue, you can get reflection off white render to increase light and openness. This is obviously located to the north. And consequently, we don't have that same shadowing issue to manage. Again, render would be a lighter material. It would reflect sunlight that hits it, but we do not feel it's necessary to do so, and thus it's more appropriate to match the character of the area and that red brick. It's an opinion, and all design opinions are subjective. That can be, if you will, deferred by that condition amendment to require submission of materials, which could be done by later condition if that was the only outstanding concern the members had.
Yeah, it was just that I'd heard I read what it was said in the report, and then obviously what's been mentioned here now. I know in previous things that lighter bricks and use of render will make a building retract a little bit, which I'm thinking, I just want to understand why we've gone back to red brick. I guess it's just for the character of the things. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Smith, is that you done? Great, Councillor Sanders.
Thanks, Joe. Just a couple of questions. Firstly, in the supplementary notes, you talk about a frosted window on the first floor, which you want to include, due to overlooking and loss of privacy that otherwise would result. Are you suggesting that in principle, the development does lead to overlooking and a loss of privacy, and essentially this is the way to sort it? That's how it reads. Is that correct, Eze?
That's correct.
Okay, that's absolutely fine. The other thing I'm interested in is what the applicant mentioned about, I think it was 24 Tregowan Avenue, is that correct? 24 Tregowan Avenue, which seemed to be a bit bigger than this. I don't know anything about the application, but I'm interested to know, is the applicant's interpretation of that application correct?
I have to find out, Councillor, that's the honest truth, yeah. No idea about that site,
Okay.
yeah.
Members, if we can put the slides back up, the team did actually pull up some images, so it should be slide 85.
Apologies if I didn't observe them.
No, they weren't in part of the presentation because we wanted to see if anyone wanted to talk about it, because every application, of course, must be judged on its own merit. So
Absolutely
the fact that
correct.
somebody's had a larger or smaller extension, I would stress, is irrelevant to your judgment. It's whether this extension is appropriate. A key distinction, obviously, between 28 and 24 is, and indeed as the objector raised, 28 backs onto a rear garden, whereas 24 sits between side gardens. It's in a linear form, as you can see from the images here. It is, I'd have to actually check the numbers, but gut feeling it is a, by square meterage, larger extension, absolutely. I don't believe there is any fundamental objection that I've seen to the scale of the extension as the character of the area. It's the impact of the extension on that facing neighbour that is the concern, and that's the judgment before you.
Okay, thank you.
Matthew. Oh, Councillor Atkins, sorry.
This might be a ludicrous hypothetical you're unable to answer, but do you think your advice would be substantially different if it was on the other side, so it was next to 26 rather than, so it appears currently, it's backing on stuff that's to the south, whereas if it was on the other side, it would be side to side with other properties only. Would that improve the situation or make it worse, do you think? Or is that a ludicrous hypothetical?
I would say, Councillor, that if it was to the north of its own site, it would have more greater impact on 26. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Hooper, have you got any questions? Okay, can I just quickly ask, in terms of the glazed window, there are two windows on that elevation. I'm presuming one of them was already frosted and this is making the other one frosted, so they are both no?
No, if I can assist members, and apologies, so that on the south elevation they're installing two new high-level windows.
Yeah.
So they don't need to be frosted, they're above normal eye height. That's covered by the strict accordance condition. It's on the northern elevation, so facing up to number 26, where there is a large standard window. That's the one that we're requiring additionally to be frosted, because otherwise it doesn't affect either of the neighbours that have spoken to you today, but it does allow unobstructed views north towards number 26.
And my memory from the plan is that there are more than one window in that bedroom, in that room, so that there would be a view out.
It has the high-level side-facing window to the south and a normal rear-facing window down the garden, which is obviously appropriate for outlook.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Colleagues, I think that's it for questions. Any comments, any proposals? It seems to me the issue here is the issue of massing and loss of amenity, and it's a balanced thing to decide whether that loss of amenity is so great that it's something that could be sustained at appeal. My understanding, and sorry, this might be a question as well, is that there are informal recommendations or standards in terms of looking from building to building in terms of how far things should be in terms of distance, but looking into gardens is not something that's covered by planning regulations. Is that so, Ian?
As always, it's an individual judgment. It is normal practice, especially in urban settings, that of course upper floor windows of neighbours overlook gardens, whether it be obliquely or directly, and consequently the degree of privacy one would expect in a rear garden in a reasonable sense is less than one would expect in a bathroom or bedroom. So the major concerns are usually, and hence the restrictions on the windows, that window to window looking, so that people can't look into spaces where you can expect total privacy, i.e. inside your home.
Okay. So I look out into several people's gardens from our house in a terrace street in Portsmouth. So it is a judgment call about whether this is loss of amenity would be so great. There has been a request from from people who come to speak to us that there should be a site visit. I know we're not theoretically doing them, but it's down to the committee to decide if they want to do one. And I will be guided by the committee. Do you want to decide it now, or do you want to have a site visit, colleagues? Councillor Sanders.
Can I propose that we do
Do what?
a site visit?
Okay. Do you have a seconder for that proposal?
I was actually going to propose the opposite, that we don't.
Okay.
Because we're in a large backlog of applications. This is a one residential extension, which I know is extremely important to the applicant, extremely important to those that live there, but in the grand scheme of what we have to get through, we can't be going and doing site visits during COVID unless we're going to do so consistently. And I think we'd have a real difficulty doing that.
Okay. So, John, Joe, do you want to do site visit, or do you want to not do site visit? John says no.
Not for me.
Okay. Joe?
I actually think in the interest of fairness we should do so.
Okay, well that's interesting. So that's two and two.
This would really affect somebody's life.
Yep, Ian, colleagues, can we just advise from the Assistant Director, site visits, I know we're not meant to be doing them, but regulations have changed. Do you think it will be possible for us to do a site visit?
Anything is impossible. We would have to look carefully at the risk assessment associated with it. I would need to know, obviously, in advance which members were attending it. That membership would have to be a quorate number. We have, obviously, unfortunately, a number of members not with us today. It goes to the logic of if a few members have attended, because it is essential that they do so, and then other members that haven't attended are then voting on the item. It creates a number of questions arising from it, but anything is possible, but we will have to carefully look at the risk assessment on how we can best undertake and support that process. I would just add, as a general point, it is obviously, I wouldn't distinguish the Fusion student scheme and this for importance. For the individuals it affects, they're equally important, and if it is essential to undertake a site visit, then it is essential to undertake a site visit. We have detailed photographs from the neighbour. I'm not sure you will gain much more than those photographs provide for you in terms of understanding the scheme. So on that basis, members have to be very confident that there is a real value to inform your decision making to require what would be a substantive delay. We're talking a couple of months delay to the determination of this application.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Smith.
I would echo that, and I would just echo what's just been said. Really, and also for me, it would be the worry that you're going to set a precedent. Everybody's going to throw in. We'll have a site visit for every planning application that comes in.
Okay, they've been on site visits in people's back gardens, and it actually having substantially changed my understanding of what it was like. I would personally say that we should have a site visit, and do it in a safe way. But if so, can I ask Ian? The logic is it's just the five of us who are here. No, it's everybody. All 10 of us.
Just to run through the procedure for it. Obviously, if you wish to defer it for a reason, undertake a site visit, it has to be motioned, seconded, and then voted on by the five of you that are here. But I think, again, one would have to question, and I'll just throw a hypothetical with apologies to you members. If only 3 of you who voted to do the site visit attended that site visit, then you come to a committee in a couple of months' time where all 10 members are voting on it. I could see the applicant complaining that 7 people are not, or indeed the objector complaining that 7 people that are voting on it didn't attend the site visit. There has got to be a logical position at some point. You cannot bar future committee members from voting on the matter, but you do create an interesting paradox.
Okay, but I think, Ian, we've got 3 of us wanting to go and 2 of us not wanting to go, so 3 beats 2. So can we, therefore I'm happy to move a deferral so that people can go, we can organise a site visit to go and look, and that it should return to another committee in the very near future, as we can get it onto an agenda. Is that seconded? Seconded by Councillor Sanders. Can I see those people in favour of that, please show? And those against? Okay, that's 3 to 2. Okay, so we're going to defer that and come for a site visit in the very near future. All 10 members of the Planning Committee will be invited, with the possible exception of the Chair, on the basis of a declared conflict of interest.
And by the way, my vote no way indicates I will try and come as long as it's possible to do so.
Absolutely. So, colleagues, and that's, of course, Chair.
I think, this isn't necessarily going to set a precedent. I think we can be sensible as adults.
Yes.
This is such a large extension that obviously this is going to be very different to other applications that come forward.
And the point of that we're not going to get into debate about this. The point of the site of the visit is to make sure that we have got the most information available to be able to make a sound judgment on this, and that's what we've decided to do. So thank you very much indeed. Can I hand back to the Chair to move to the next applicant, and thank colleagues from Drayton for coming up and talking to us. Thank you.
Okay, thanks everybody for that. So we'll move on now to the last item. Sorry, I beg your pardon. The penultimate item, which is the News Centre, London Road, Hillsea. Hannah, where's Hannah? Is she here? I thought Hannah was doing this one. Ezzy then. Ezzy, over to you, Ezzy.
Thank you, Chair. The application before members today is for an advert internally illuminated sign at the News Centre on London Road, Hillsea, and that's for a high-level facial. This relates to a site which previously had consent for an advertisement, similar advertisement, which had since elapsed. The site in question relates to the News Centre, which occupies a comparatively large site located to the eastern side of London Road. The principal building, which is the press halls and offices which front London Road, and the surrounding areas comprises of residential properties to the north and west and south of the application site. However, the London Road to the east is where it hosts a mix of commercial and residential uses, and this will be where the location for the signage. And this just gives a view of the street view, and that is the proposed signage. We'll just give further details in the next slide. Thank you. And the main considerations with this application is for the visual and oral amenity, and also the impact on public amenity and safety. Following the receipt of the application and consideration, objection was received from a neighbor with regards the proposed signage in sense that will be oriented to the rear of neighboring properties and will cause statutory nuisance, and again that there will be light pollution and disturbance at night, and further the illumination would have impact on bird life and local wildlife. Officers have considered the site and its surroundings. I can just show you a photograph from the rear of garden of 3 York Terrace. Officers have considered the application, especially in the light of the flood concern that was since elapsed. I believe that was in 2017. And I've also considered the comments from the local highway authority, and in terms the level of illumination that is required for such signages. The illumination level would see that marginally, but the key consideration here is the setback of the property in question, the application site, and the location of the signage itself, which is around 37 meters, and the view is that, and it's fronting a highway, so the impact on the local highway network, the impact on neighbors is found to be quite negligible, and so hence officers have passed this to members with a recommendation for conditional advert consent. Thank you.
Okay, so to make sure that the TV camera doesn't go on to the deputation, and over to you, Heidi.
Thank you. Could you bring up the pictures of the back garden for me, if that's all right? So the bottom picture is a panoramic view of the garden, and on the top left corner you can see some windows. The one on the very left is my child's back bedroom, which does face towards where this sign will be lit. So I'll cover that in a minute, but just so you know where that is on the picture there. So the requested location is set back from the main road, but it would be very visible from our back garden and up to our neighbouring properties. However, due to the angle of our property, we are mostly affected. Number 4 has also raised similar concerns about this, but didn't formally object. There are very large trees along the entrance into the news centre and to one side of our garden, shielding us from a lot of the building. But the requested location for this sign is after the trees end, and it is very visible and would be an eyesore from our property. It's currently a light grey building, so not too overpowering visually, although a large structure, but with a large lit sign attached to it, it will draw your eyes straight to the sign and building from our garden. I've provided photos from our garden to the case handler, which I believe you've got there. It might not be clear from there just how visible it is. It's hard to take it in a picture. I'm sure you appreciate that. And I have also, I appreciate site visits are not going ahead, but I have also said there would be a site visit option. We've got back access. There wouldn't need to be COVID secure things, but I'll go to that later. We strongly believe that both the position and the sign of the sign and the requested lighting is unreasonable and substantially would interfere with the use and enjoyment of our home and garden. We've got a young family who spent a lot of time and money on our property, and we spend a lot of time in the garden, and from every angle in our garden this sign would be visible. And we feel it will impact on our enjoyment of our garden and would cause a statutory nuisance. And at night time we would lose natural light in the garden. There is street lights there, but obviously a lit sign is a bit more prominent. We feel it would cause light pollution, be obtrusive light, and become a dominant feature at night, being visible from the whole back of our property. And we are very concerned that at night the light will become a nuisance into our young child's bedroom. The 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. limit discussed still feels excessively intrusive on our young child when their bedtime is 6 o'clock, so the light would still become a nuisance. There is also consideration to the local wildlife. There are a lot of trees around this area that birds nest in at the front of the news centre and right in front of where the sign is proposed for, and on the green at the rear of our property alongside the news centre. And the unnatural lighting would have a negative impact on their welfare. The location for the sign is unnecessary, being so set back from the main road and overlooking onto the residential properties. It will become a dominant feature from our property. There are many other alternative locations much more visible from the road at the front of this building that this could be placed as to not impact or interfere onto residential properties, gardens and bedrooms. We've lived here for 8 years and accept that we live next to a commercial property. We've dealt with many changes over that time, but feel that this is a step too far if we're going to have the enjoyment of our garden taken away from us. We've also considered if there was anything that we could do to block the visibility of the sign from our garden, but due to the high location and the angle of the sign, there is nothing that we can do to protect our privacy and to block any harmful views from a sign, and we feel this makes us helpless in the matter and feel like it would greatly impose on our right to enjoy our property and our garden. Thank you.
Okay, members, any questions please about this? Councillor Sanders.
Thank you. What are the differences between this scheme and the previously consented sign?
Councillor, just find out the details. Thank you.
For the benefit of the objector, that's essentially the bit of relevant planning history in page 98, all right?
Members, apologies, both Eze and I have lost internet connectivity here, so we're unable to refer to 0701 adverts, so we don't have that information. I've sent a message over to the team to see if they can come back to me on WhatsApp with any
If you could, I'll go into a comment as to why I'm linking of this. At the moment, we've got a previously consented sign that just hasn't happened. And what I'm wanting to know is that basically if this is the same size or smaller, then I think despite the objectors' concerns, which are understandable, we're stuffed. Basically, I can't see any sustainable planning reason to refuse this. If it's bigger, then that's a slightly different discussion. But if it's smaller or it's the same size as what was previously consented, then in planning law, our hands aren't quite tied, but they're all but tied.
I think it also depends on which bit was implemented or not.
Remember, if I may, obviously, there's a number of very valid summary there. Obviously, if a advert in the same location, at the same size, with the same illumination, has previously found to be acceptable, and there's been no other fundamental changes in circumstances, then a consistency of public decision-making would suggest where your decision should take you. But obviously we need to compare the location on the building, the size and the illumination, which as soon as we can get through to the case officers or get the internet working, we will come back to you with an answer to that.
Right. Do you think it would take very long? Because I'm wondering if we can get on with the next one, Kieran. Would that be permissible in these circumstances whilst we wait for the information to come along?
I wouldn't want to take business out of order, no.
All right.
No.
I think it's important to establish, because there was a split decision before, which... if you could turn your microphone on, Ken.
If it had been the other way around, and it had been the west that had been refused and the north that had been accepted, then that's a whole different onion of kettles, frankly.
Chair, if it's helpful, I have internet access on my PCC machine here if somebody wants to borrow it. Ian, is that helpful?
The COVID challenge associated with that, but bear with us just 1 minute and we'll see what we can...
So is this on the north elevation or the west elevation? Because otherwise it's very clear on page 98.
It's the western one, Lee. They're both on page 98.
If you read the paragraph...
yes.
It's on the western one, but it's on the indent of the western one.
Sorry, could you guys stick your mics on?
It's on the western one, but it's on the indent of the western one. So if it was previously on the full frontage, it would have been in a different location that wouldn't have affected the houses. The map at the top of page 98, I think, is helpful because I'm very sure it's in the indented straight section. Anything previously on the curved section wouldn't have had an impact.
Yeah. I think that's helpful, Ezzy.
Thank you, Chair. My understanding was that the one to the north was refused, the one to the west was approved.
But this, as Councillor Atkins says, on that indent just here.
Is that the same location? It may well be, I don't know.
Members, my officers have come back and said they are in very similar location, but I'm limited by my technology here to actually give you more details than that. They can probably hear me speaking in the office as we speak, but I don't have an image which I think would be useful to share to you. The neighbour has given you their deputation and their very fair concerns regarding the impact on their amenity. It is obviously open to you to consider whether you wish to defer it to actually have the images of the 07 consent in front of you to make that comparison, or whether you are satisfied, as I would say I personally am, that is a matter that the case officer has looked at and they're coming back saying no, it's similar, they've looked at that matter and they've deemed that this one is acceptable. But if you want to make that direct comparison yourself by comparing the two images, you'll have to allow us to defer this item today and bring that back to a future committee.
I hope we make a decision today. Councillor Atkins. So we're now in questions, Councillor Atkins.
Yeah, I've pulled up the elevations from the previous application. It appears to me that the news sign was on the top of a tall tower. Is that the case with this application? The top of a tower which is much taller height than the rest of the building.
No, Councillor, it doesn't appear to be the case with the signage.
Meaning the previous application?
I can't see the previous one, apologies.
I think what we're going to decide is whether or not we agree with the deputation or not, that the light will adversely impact their current residential amenities.
Chair, am I understanding that there is a condition imposed that this is not on after 8 o'clock in the evening?
That's correct.
There's also, as I understand it, we don't know the exact position that it's the previous application is in, which has been given consent, and that could be, even though it's lapsed, if they come back and ask for exactly the same, there'd be no possible way of refusing it because it's already consented. So I think the decision for us is, do we want to wait until we can see the exact drawings of exactly where the current application is in relation to where the previous application is and how substantially different that is, or not? And it's a big building, and even though I think I would trust Ian, and the judgment is that even if the ladies come to speak to us is unhappy with it, it is so close to where the previous application that's been given consent is that it would get through anyway. I'm not certain about doing that without having the picture in front of me. So I'm sorry to be difficult, and I'm very conscious of the backlog, and I'm very conscious of trying to make sure that we get through them. But also, I think we have to be making decisions with as much information as possible, and therefore I would say that unless we can get that that image over to us, I think I would go for a deferral until we can see that piece of evidence.
Yes, sadly, I think this was an unanticipated question, therefore the officers haven't been able to bring the information there. But it is a relevant consideration, isn't it? I'm on balance minded to want to refuse it. But
Chairman,
go on, Mr.
May I just assist? So 2007 is quite a long time ago, but obviously we're talking about a home that did exist at the time and a building that did exist at the time, so the relationship is the same. So one must first question the direct relevance of it. I should say the advertisement regulations and the general guidance associated with advertisements haven't changed. So clearly, if we have refused a materially similar sign in the past, then I would be recommending you refuse it now. I'm not recommending you refuse it now. I am confident of the professional competency, as of course you are as well, of your officers, and they've made that comparison. What I can't do is place the two images side by side to say this is what was acceptable and unacceptable, and this is what's now being proposed and we consider them to be acceptable. So I can't reference why it's acceptable. You have therefore the professional officer's professional assessment that it is acceptable. is really down to you, therefore, whether you feel that's something you should defer.
I can be absolutely clear. I'm not calling into question anybody's professional competence. I just think if we're going to make a decision, there's a particular issue that's been raised, and we should therefore see the evidence.
Right, the officer's making absolutely fair representations. If this had been refused or the committee had thrown it out, that would have been brought up before. So we have to accept their explanation. This is a very similar application which has been consented before. But we don't have to put it in or throw it in or get rid of it. We could also impose a condition that be an externally illuminated sign if we wanted. And it went off at 7, say, rather than 8. But clearly they want it to be seen. It's a matter of us helping everybody, Councillor Atkins and Councillor Sanders.
I wanted to ask that question directly to the planning officers. Can we tighten the condition around the timings, and if so, is there a reasonable limit? So if I wanted to say business hours, 9 to 5:30, 9 to 6, would that be reasonable or not?
Members, if I can assist, it is a condition you can put whatever is reasonable. Why would 5:30, 6 o'clock be reasonable? 7, 8 o'clock is obviously, let's not pretend that adverts are for an obvious commercial purpose. This is a facing towards trafficked area. They are looking to promote their business and the imagery that you're provided for in the slides. Consequently, they're going to want it running through the rush hour period. That takes you around to 8 o'clock. There is clearly a conflict between when the applicant will want to display this advert and when a neighbour will want their child to be in bed. I'm not going to pretend that that's obviously a conflict and a very fair concern to express by the neighbour. So, members, I'm confident my professional officer's opinion is for you. I am, however, wanting to be fair to all parties, and it may well be that the deferral is the appropriate way forward, so you can have those two images if that's what you think is the defining factor. If you, however, feel that this is an unacceptable scheme in any case, 2007 is such a long time ago, you're able to come to a legitimate judgment, or indeed whether additional conditions should be imposed. But again, if you were worried about that additional condition and the reasonableness of timings you would now want to suggest, and we'd have to have a time rather than business hours, obviously for specificity, obviously a deferral would enable us to discuss that with the applicant as well. So if it was those two matters you felt were still unclear, deferral would deal with both of them.
Councillor Sanders and Councillor Smith.
Thank you. I would like to support what Mr Maguire has just said. If this is the same location, it is pointless, frankly, discussing this, because this has gone through in my mind, and I think that the applicant would have a reasonable chance to appeal to say, well, this has already been agreed, yes, it was ages ago, but I am concerned about the amount of time that this light is on, even with getting it back to 8 o'clock. Something like, say, 6 o'clock or 7 o'clock, I think would be quite reasonable. 7 till 7 is the equinox, which means for half the year it's less of an issue. That seems to me to be sensible, and that's something that can be done. So I would support what Councillor Vernon Jackson has said, and we just defer this for a couple of weeks.
It won't be a couple of weeks.
It won't be. It'll be a couple of months, won't it? Yeah. But I think that's right, because I think if we refuse this, and I'm potentially minded to refuse this if we're not careful, then I think that there is a real risk that the applicant would come back to us and say, this is basically the same location, what are you playing at? And we would suffer financially.
Right, I think we can find a compromise. Councillor Smith.
My one was just to add a condition from a sound point of view as well, because I know some of these, I'm not saying this one is at the moment, but just to cover it off in the future, that I know some signs also have music playing behind them, or they can also have an audible sound as well. So just to cover that one off as well for any future.
Well, my thinking is that externally illuminated signs are very visibly intrusive. That's their purpose, to get you to look at them. So I think we can find a compromise here, and it would be an externally illuminated sign which pushes the light down onto the sign, so you can still be seen, and it goes off at 7 o'clock rather than 8 o'clock. So that's my proposition anyway. So there's two conditions to give consent. Councillor Atkins.
Wondering if that's possible to do, because it sounds like a different application. It's an application for a different thing. I don't know what you think.
It is technically possible to do. Again, members, you'll have to come to a judgment around the fairness of making a substantive change. It's within the same application process largely, but you're pushing up against the edges of it, certainly. Whether it's fair to do so, to grant the permission, which obviously would be of concern to the objector, potentially with amendments which could also be of concern to the applicant, a lose-lose proposition, potentially. Again, deferral would be a way of managing that. We should be able to bring it back to the next committee, because this is just a couple of phone calls to resolve. Really.
If you only take comments, I'll comment.
Yeah, we're in comments there. So I got a proposition there. I would like to see the concerns met by the made by the deputation, because the illuminated signs are very intrusive. They're glaring, aren't they? It's what they're meant to do. So that's what I would want to do in any event. So we're in comments now. I've got a proposition on there, which is to, but there's also another one to defer. So should we go through comments? And I know we've got a bit mixed up here, Kieran, I'm sorry. But we've got a deferral and a proposition by me on the table.
Okay, it would be helpful if you could go through, I hear what you're saying in terms of deferral, which is just unfortunate the internet has completely crashed on everyone. The proposition I'd like a bit more detail on, because there was talk from Councillor Smith about a sound condition that I don't think was particularly addressed. I think that also butts up against issues Councillor Atkins raised in terms of, is that not just a fundamentally different type of advertisement? So that's not, to my mind, on the table, but I'd defer to Ian on that. And yes, I have concerns about actually you haven't consulted on an externally illuminated sign, for example. The application for you is internally illuminated, and you don't know what other people feel about that at this stage.
All right, for the sake of argument, I'll take that off the table and go for deferral, but as long as they come back at the next rotation and get this dealt with.
Okay, so you're proposing a deferral to allow the plans to be brought to the committee?
I'd like to defer it on kind of all of the above. So it looks to me like the previous application was on a higher bit of the building, which was marginally further away from the housing, and this is now on a lower bit, which is marginally closer. So I would like the precise locations of the two applications confirmed. I would also like it deferred so that it could be discussed with the applicant whether or not they would accept shorter hours of illumination and also an externally illuminated sign rather than internally illuminated. And then you could even consider, could there be a decibel condition on the noise as well? While you're making those considerations, you might decide it's not appropriate. But since we're deferring it, you might as well. So that would be my proposal, deferral while all of those matters are considered.
So it looks like we're heading for a deferral, gentlemen. And the other thing to say is, apologies the information isn't there, but I would also advocate for the officers, we do have some pre-agendas, and there's not a criticism, because people can't always make pre-agendas, but they are easy to attend via a team. And these sorts of questions can be teased out. But of course, sometimes they come out in the discussion, and you suddenly realise things should be there, shouldn't be there. So coming to the pre-agenda does help. Okay, so looks like we've got a proposition to defer, Kieran, properly made by several members.
Who's taking it though? Whose is it?
So I think it was Councillor Gerald Burns-Jackson that first did it, but for the sake of cross-party and Councillor Atkins is deferring for a number of reasons. That's fine by me.
So Councillor Atkins is proposing, you're seconding?
No, Gerald Burns-Jackson proposing, Councillor Atkins seconding.
So it's a deferral to address issues of sound plans and internal versus external illumination?
Yes, apologies to the officers.
Yep. That's fine by me, that's clear. You're free to vote on it.
All those in favour of deferral, please show, so that's unanimous. Thank you for your time, gents. Move on to item number 6 now. So this is a retrospective application, a City Council application, that's why it's here. Who is introducing this one, gents? Ezzy. Thank you, Ezzy.
Thank you, Chair. This is a retrospective, as the Chair said, for a landscaped area to the east of the Museum, Clarence. Is the installation of a sculpture on concrete plates. I'll just bring the slide that shows the landscaped area in question. In the course of the application going through consideration by officers, the installation had taken place. And that's the reason why it's not retrospective. The application site is located to the east of the D-Day Museum, and the site is within the conservation area. There's quite a lot of heritage assets. So you've got the South Sea Castle, and it's also included in and the South Sea Common, which is an area included in the Historic England's Register for Parks and Gardens for Special Interest. And there's a number of listed buildings and shaded ancient monuments within the immediate area. Considerations for this installation, it has to do with the principle of it, the heritage, the impact on heritage assets, and the public community. With regards to the principle, it's located in an area that there's a number of street furnitures, but it's an open park, and it's considered that the installation is acceptable in principle. With regards the impact on heritage assets, that's been considered, and the view is that it would, in light of statutes, the view is that it would have there will not be any substantial harm to any of the heritage assets in question. With regard public community, as said before, it's within a public park, and it's believed that it's well suited for its location. And hence, members, officers have recommended this to yourselves for conditional permission. Albeit it's retrospective, but it's one that we are comfortable that it meets all the statutes requirements, especially in regards to impact on heritage assets. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Ezzy. Members, any questions? Councillor Atkins.
Sorry, could you quickly repeat why it's retrospective? So why was it installed during the process of the application rather than waiting for the conclusion?
Thank you, Chair. I have no reason before me which the applicants have decided to go forward with it. But my understanding is that it was installed during the course of the application. So it wasn't, the installation did not take place before the application was submitted. So in the course of its consideration, it's now become a retrospective application because the installation has now been completed.
What date was the application submitted, do you know?
Sorry, I haven't got internet connection, so, but
13th of May 2021, based on the report. That's the recommended determination date. The long stop date is the 9th of July, so it would have been 8 weeks before the 9th of July.
Go ahead.
I think I noticed, but just to confirm, this is a statue effectively in a peace garden, celebrating peace and opposing war, essentially. Is that correct?
That's correct, Councillor.
Okay, that's all the questions. Members, Councillor Sanders.
No, it's merely a comment to move the officer recommendations, if I may.
Second day.
Just a couple of comments. I would say that it being retrospective, it is not a valid reason to refuse this at planning. And I have to say, a very unattractive sculpture in the city that had the tricorn this is far from being the tricorn building. This is a huge and a potentially beneficial addition to what is a peace garden, which includes also the memorial to the mass gassing by Saddam Hussein of Halabja, and is also somewhere very close to where we hold various remembrance ceremonies and Holocaust ceremonies. This is an ideal sculpture for this area, and I'm delighted to put it forwards.
Thank you, Councillor Sanders. Councillor Atkins.
Yeah, Chair, while I support the statue, I think it's quite appropriate for public art to commemorate these things and to have a peace garden. I am slightly concerned, and I do think I want to comment briefly on the fact that Portsmouth City Council has installed it before the planning application process was complete. I do think that's slightly inappropriate, merely in the message that it sends to other applicants. We would take a dim view. Yes, it's not a reason for refusing, and we consider it on its own merits, but we would often criticise an applicant for beginning work during the process of the application. And so I do want to say that we should be following our own policies and own principles and should really have waited for the conclusion of the process, though in principle I support the statue, and I think it's appropriate in that location. I think it is, as Councillor Sanders said, an attractive statue, and I'm happy to second the officer's recommendation, but I do want to note it and mention that I'm criticising the council for installing it prior to obtaining permission, because we would take a dim view of an applicant doing that in any other context, and we should be keeping our own rules.
Yes, thank you. I suspect it was probably got on with because there was some important commemoration coming up, and it wanted it to be done, and it probably went in for that reason. But I understand the point that you're making. Councillor Hooper.
Just want to quickly say, not much more to add, but I think it's entirely appropriate that this statue is there, especially with the horrible events unfolding in Afghanistan right now. I understand what you're saying, Matt, but I think based upon this, I don't think members of the public or anybody would really, have a problem with the statue. Given the context, I really don't. Thank you.
All right. No, that's it. That's fine. Thank you all very much indeed, members, for your time today. If we just go to the vote on that one, if you don't mind, and all those approving the recommendation, thank you. That's unanimous, and a nice note to finish on. And thank you, Councillor Hooper, for reminding us what's going on right now. That's the end of the meeting, everybody. Thank you all very much for your time today. Please do try to attend the pre-agendas, those of us who are particularly regular members, because some of the issues could be teased out, though I don't think that issue that happened around the news centre would have been necessarily today. Okay? All right, gents. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, Kieran. Thank you, Jane. Thank you, everybody, again. Bye-bye for now.